Recording in progress.
Okay, go
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Would like to call this March 11th work group to order for operations. Start with written comment. We have 3 written comments, 2 in support of addressing the climate change sustainability goals by 2040, and 1 in support of the 4.12% cost of living increase for staff. And then we have 4 in person.
Person online, Ron Shalif. And feel free to. You don't have to unmute or anything.
Yeah,
No,
we're good.
feel free to talk.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am here with the West Side Green Club once again to remind this board of the need to achieve sustainability as soon as possible, which in this case means a commitment to a 2040 timeline. Time and time again, students have declared sustainability to be a top priority. From the over 800 students that signed the letter in the Cap Times to the extraordinarily dedicated students who come to these meetings repeatedly to talk for sustainability. So we know that there is demand to address this issue. Tonight, we are asking the board to commit to a 2040 timeline and then be done with modifying its goals. This process of arguing over the goals has severely delayed, distracted from, and undermined the ability of this district to actually plan for sustainability and take tangible action. Of the options of sustainability goals presented to this board, scenario 2 is the best choice. It is clear that scenario 1 is impractical and scenario 3 is irresponsible. The former closes too many schools and the latter adds another decade of greenhouse gas emissions. A 2040 timeline has a range of additional benefits as well. I can't get into all of them here, but I'm happy to pass out this little flyer if people are interested. And we need a firm commitment and more staff like a sustainability manager to address this. And this isn't just about sustainability, it's about health. Diesel buses and gas boilers are toxic to children, leading to negative impacts both now and in the future. And this isn't just about health, it's about education. Through sustainability renovations, we have the opportunity to teach our students about climate solutions and show them how, when faced with a major challenge, we confront it without delay. But this isn't just about education, it's about justice, because we know that people of color and people with disabilities suffer the most from the climate crisis. So our swift action is necessary for equity and accessibility. And of course, this isn't just about justice, it's about the future. Our futures depend on decisive action now. Without it, we will go down in history as part of the problem. So tonight, we are calling on this board to be part of the solution. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to pass out any of our Y2040 timelines.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nate Martin.
My name is Nate Martin. I'm a junior at Madison West High School. I hate public speaking and I needed this time to study for tests tomorrow and Wednesday, but this is too important of an issue to stay silent. I don't think I have to reiterate why climate change is a problem or why sustainability is necessary. But the time to make a decision is now, and you all have the power to make a big difference. Commit to this 2040 sustainability timeline. This plan will save money in the long run, especially under the climate change is responsible for millions of deaths worldwide. Action now will prevent more. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Holly Dolan.
Hi, I'm also not a huge fan of public speaking, so I'll keep this pretty short.
My name is Holly and I go to West High School. I'm part of our Green Club. And I'm here to advocate for the 2040 timeline of our sustainability goals. Sustainability is important because climate change is all around us and it's vital that we protect our Earth for future generations. Stand up for us and listen to student voices. Thank you for your time.
Our final speaker is Natalie Lessenjack.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie. I'm a junior at West High School, and I'm also here to support MMSD's 2040 sustainability goal. As a school district, MMSD is one of the best, capable of taking new ideas into account, as well as creating change to improve the lives of all of its students. And this is why it's so essential that the district sticks with this legacy and commits to a goal of reaching 100% renewable energy by 2040. One of the key steps in this process is the addition of school district staff in charge of sustainability efforts. It is time that MMSD appoints a sustainability manager. We cannot expect to lead a complete and successful movement without the designation of a qualified and hardworking leader. It is also no secret that this task will be a hard one, especially in the area of finances. However, we already know that it will boost finances in the long run. And I think that working hard and making a few sacrifices is worth my future as well as the future of over 25,000 other students. MMSD really needs to stick to its sustainability goal. If we wait any longer, we will regret it once it has already been far too late. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we have the minutes. So I move to approve the minutes from Operations Work Group meeting dated March 11th, 2024.
Second,
Second, Board Member Muldrow. All those in favor?
aye.
Aye. Motion carries 6-0. So packed agenda tonight, 4 agenda items. We'll first talk about the transportation update and changes we've made since the fall. Receive feedback from the community regarding a potential referendum and the budget. Review MMSD sustainability goals and the resolution, and that will carry into our budget development. And then finally, we will review the Board of Education student fee policy. So transportation, let's take it away.
Thank you, Savion, appreciate that. So before we get started, I just wanted to take a few minutes just to frame our conversation tonight because we do have a packed agenda. Savion, thank you for sharing that. So I also want to thank our central office team for putting together a pretty incredible amount of content tonight. So thank you to Kenneth, thank you to Bob, to Jennifer and the team for putting that all together. Appreciate all of you very much. Specifically related to transportation, we'll be discussing what we've learned about our transportation system, what feedback we received, and what we learned from our internal audit, and then where we're going in 24-25. We know that you want to hear that what we are doing will ensure that the system is consistent and reliable and safe for our students. So as you know, despite a challenging start, our MMSD transportation systems have stabilized since we changed start times in November of 23. Since then, we have worked very closely with First Student, Madison Metro, and our other providers. So tonight you'll see that we're actually going to start 24-25 with a 3-tiered system of transportation. And Kenneth will go into that in more detail. And I want to thank our guests in the room from First Student for being here to support our work and our partnership moving forward. So I see you and thank you for being here. Appreciate you being here. We believe that this 3-tiered system, for a variety of reasons, including increased stability, increased flexibility, plain old logistics that you've heard us talk about before and that I have learned a ton about this year, driver availability and student safety is the reason that we'll be talking with you about our 3-tiered system. This will make sure that our system is consistent and reliable. Kenneth will talk about how this system will enhance safety, reduce overcrowding, allow enough drivers to substitute and or add routes where needed. So for example, at schools right now where there are 2 buses and they're pretty full to capacity, in the next year's model, we'll have an availability of a driver to add a bus to that route. So what you will not see tonight are actual start times and schedules. Tonight, we're just gonna talk to you about the why and what we've learned. We will share school start times by the end of April with staff and families. And we know that families need that information. We also wanna be sure we get it right. And we wanna be transparent tonight about how we got to this solution. Again, we see a partnership with First Student, and we need this healthy partnership to get our kids to school. And this is the same for Metro and our other providers. Also, I'd like to add, we're talking about sustainability tonight. First Student is one of our industry leaders related to electric busing. We have 5 electric buses approved, and we are hoping for more, so fingers crossed. Also, as a reminder, we do use Metro and have had ongoing meetings with the Metro staff related to high school students in our transportation. Metro doesn't have the capacity to transport middle school students or any other students. And their routes, their locations, and the ways in which they've changed some of their schedules and times don't align with ours and would actually create greater inequities were we to add more Metro routes. So I just want to provide that backdrop as we continue and talk about this. So you'll hear Kenneth and our team, and we feel confident that we are in a way better place now than we were a year ago at this time. First Student has stepped up its hiring, training, and development of drivers. I want to thank Dr. Herding for actually going through that process himself and helping to inform the system and us as to how that's going. And First Student also increased wages through drivers through this national shortage that continues to plague our community and our school district. Communication has improved immensely. I want to thank the team. And Kenneth is going to share a little bit more about more personal ways that we'll be able to communicate with families and students about related to the app and the other ways that we're able to get in touch with folks in a more timely fashion. So believe me, we have all learned from our lived experiences. Thank you for being here again tonight. And we know that we can do better by our students and families by working together and creating this system for 24-25. In terms of budget updates, we have updated information. And again, every time we come together, we learn a little bit more. And Bob's going to talk a little bit about where we're at. Jennifer's going to talk a little bit about where we came in with insurance. Bob's going to share a little bit about Fund 10 details. And you know, after reviewing the content with the team this morning, I'm really proud of the way in which our Board of Education has supported the total compensation package for teachers, including health and dental insurance. So we'll share a little bit about that and where that came in today. So every month we get a little bit closer to understanding where we need to be for preliminary budget approval at the end of June. So we know that we're covering a lot of content. We promise to be efficient and transparent and also thorough at the same time. So hold us to that. And just want to thank you for participating in our meeting tonight. So Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Good evening, everybody. We're gonna be efficient. Moving that along. Just want to spend a little bit of time grounding ourselves in terms of the strategic framework and goals for the department. In terms of this year is Kids First, our focus, our future. I want to give a shout out to the comms team. I was in a couple of meetings with statewide participants last week, and I used it as my backdrop, our Kids First, and they complimented on how cool it was. And I said, it's our comms department. Good work, it keeps you focused. It was great. I want to talk about the strategic framework goals, which really guide our decisions, not only for 24-25 budget development, but how we're managing 23-24. There's always changes as the year goes on. It's definitely worth us visiting in terms of our goal. Number 1 is every child is on track to graduate ready for college, career, and community. The district and every school in it is a place where children, staff, and families thrive, and African-American children excel in school. These are implemented through our core values of belonging, excellence, racial equity, and social justice, voice, focus, and creativity. And Chair Castro has already covered our agenda. I'm gonna start with, as Lisa mentioned, the transportation update here from Kenneth and our partners at First Student. I want to give a shout out to Beth and her team in terms of data and research. You did a great job summarizing our community outreach and sessions and survey information. That Jen Shepke, who will be arriving shortly. She had another meeting. She's traveling here now as we speak. We want to cover those. I call them positive results because they're results that I wanted to see from the survey, so they're positive. Want to spend a little bit of time on the sustainability goals that we have, and if there's interest, talk about that. I've got some draft resolutions. Want to talk about some of the options that we have, and if there's a willingness or want to change that resolution, we'd like to do that at the Board of Education meeting a week from today. And then talk about the 24-25 budget. I'll say it now, otherwise I'll forget later. There also will be a resolution and papers for you all to sign to implement the $7 million in debt defeasance. That's the additional levy you approved last fall. It's time to implement that. There's a memo out to the board and resolutions that will make that happen yet this year, where we'll put $7 million into an escrow, which will save us $5.2 million in principal interest payments over the remaining life of the bond. So we pay $7 million today and we get a buy down of $12 million, so a 5.2 savings of principal and interest payments on the debt that exists from the 2020 referendum. So that's great news. And then finally, and not least, we'll talk about our policies related to fees and USDA policy in terms of some of the issues the USDA audit identified that we need to strengthen our policies. So with that, Kenneth, I hand it to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Kavistad of the Board of Education. I thank you for this time. Thank you for our partners, First Student and Central Office and the community as a whole for this time to be able to speak to you about our transportation update. Which I'll try to keep it very brief. I know that we are pressed for time. I could talk about transportation all day, but I don't want to do that today. So I just want to kind of go over some overviews. We're going to first talk about our internal audit. Then we'll go into the transportation survey. We'll have our partners First Student present some data on their side. We'll talk about our Metro update, what we've learned throughout this year, and then what the future holds. Next slide. So we initiated an internal audit. We want to look at what are we doing as a district? How are we doing it, and how effective is it, and how sustainable is it? So we've started to go through this internal audit process, and we're looking at several areas of our transportation department, as well as the areas that we serve, the student population, as well as the departments that we serve. Here you'll see a few numbers here. This is just some high-level overview of the number of students that we are servicing in different areas. Next slide. Here's the data that we want to really, not really dig deep into, but give you some understanding. So we looked at a plethora of different areas. We looked at our enrollment, how we do internal transfers, alternate address usage within the district, our specialized transportation, our DLI program, our hazardous walk area, 4K enrollment and overview, and our routing software. These are some areas that we see in transportation that we've identified as areas that we can clean up, so to speak. We're looking with our enrollment department to see how we can streamline the process of getting the information of whether you need transportation or not. Want to put that in the hands of our parents. We have our current system is this. Every student that is eligible for transportation, we capture that data and we enroll them, and then we put them on a route. The issue there is we truly don't know the number of kids that are actually riding or need transportation. So we're looking at, during the enrollment process, creating an opt-out platform. So if you know that your child is not going to utilize transportation for whatever reason throughout the entirety of the year, we want to be able to give you that opportunity to say, well, we don't really need to take advantage of transportation right now. That doesn't mean that they won't ever be able to opt back in. That has always been MMSD's policy. is new students that now move and they are eligible for transportation. We will enroll them and we will route them. But we want to start to begin to streamline our process so that going into every year, there's ease and efficiency for our staff as well as our transportation partners and our routing and creating that information to put on our website and get out to families sooner. I know in talking to our enrollment department, currently we have roughly around 85% of families are doing the electronic enrollment. We want to boost that, but we also want to make sure that we're taking care of that population. So we're looking at ways to streamline transportation and enrollment and bring that together. Also looking at just our internal transfer. We want to make sure that there are some students that internal transfer and then they are eligible for transportation. But we want to make sure that every area of our student population is meeting our district policy around transportation. We've seen some gaps in that and we want to make sure that we're cleaning that up. A big portion of what we're seeing in students' transportation is our alternative address usage. So we currently have 600 students that are using alternative addresses other than their home address as a pickup or a drop-off location. We've isolated 106 students that we kind of question, right? So we want to make sure that those 106 students that are being transported are still adhering to our transportation policy. And we want to make sure our schools understand the process, our departments understand the process, and in the way that flows into our transportation services. Another key area is our specialized transportation. We have several students that are on solo rides, which means if you have a vehicle that holds 8 students, we only have 1 student riding at a time. We want to make sure that we're maximizing our ability to service our students as well as get as much our bang for our buck with regards to our drivers and our vehicles, right? So of the 125 students that are currently on a solo ride, 16 of those actually have it in their IEP. So now we will have to go back and look at the rest of the population and say, is there a way to take them from this most restrictive environment to a least restrictive environment? That's where First Student plays the major part. They have great resources in the way of helping us to take a student that may be restricted and from a transportation standpoint in a restricted environment and work them back to a least restricted environment, i.e. either a yellow bus or a ride with multiple students on the same vehicle. Also, there's been some things within our DLI program that we do offer transportation for dual language students. One of the things, it's more along the lines of more communication thing. We clean up the communication between schools, the DLI program, and transportation. There's some gaps there, so we're looking to audit that as well. Another area is our hazardous walk area. So we currently have a hazardous walk area plan, and we're looking at, do some of these hazards that were once in place from 2002, are they still hazardous, right? The city works quite diligently to put sidewalks in, traffic signals, things of that nature, where we may not actually have a need for a hazardous walk area in some areas. So we're working with our Office of School Safety to look at those areas as well. And a very key area is our 4K program. We've seen an increase year over year since I've been here in our 4K population that requires transportation. We have an overflow program that was implemented, but we're not sure that it's suitable in the form that it is now and to meet the needs going forward as far as 4K coupled with transportation. So we want to look at ways to make sure that we have the drivers that we need, we have the vehicles that we need, and that we can service the students and the families in the areas that they need to go to in a timely manner. Lastly, our routing software. We've been with TransFinder since 2002. I think that it's served the district well, it seems. There are some capabilities that we do not have in 2024 that I would like to see in talking with like our partners like Metro, I'd like to see our routing to be a little bit more interactive, a single platform where we can do multiple things out of it. And that's, so we're looking at different softwares that may give us that capability to streamline and be more efficient in our day-to-day tasks in transportation.
One thing just to add is you'll see some asterisks next to some of those. Those are indicative of us developing a communication plan for families who might be currently on transportation, who based upon this are outside of those guidelines. And we will be developing a communication plan for those individuals so that they are made aware early as possible. So just think in mind, we recognize like some of these findings, we found that there were some individuals who were outside of our policy. And so we need to make sure like we are communicating with them as early as possible. And so we're going to begin to engage in those plans as well.
Absolutely. At this time, I'd like to pause if there's any questions from the board, what we've talked about thus far. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask about 4K.
Mhm.
Can you talk right about what the system is right now for 4K students?
So currently, we have programming throughout the district, correct? So then what happens is when those if you live in the Albion area, there's only so many slots at Albion. After that, we work with 4K to create an overflow. Typically, if you live in the Albion area, there's an overflow, say Kennedy and say Henderson, right? So what happens is when the students in the Albion area, 4K students in the Albion area, when there's no more slots there, we overflow them to closest in proximity. That helps us logistically, that helps us to be able to provide transportation, but not have to bring in vehicles from further away from the city. And it takes longer to get those students, pick them up and get them to the school. So what we're finding is that once those overflows are full, then it becomes a case by case basis on how we are to try to find an open slot for that student and provide transportation. And then the issue there is the timeliness. Typically, we want to make sure that when we get a request, that we're fulfilling that request within 3 days and that child is starting. When we have those overflows to the overflow of the overflow, it just lengthens that process because we have to work with our transportation partner, trying to find what vehicles that we may be able to put that student on. And it becomes a little bit tedious. And the biggest problem is family is out there waiting, right? We're trying to, if I could get 48 hours, that would be great. But right now that we've seen it where it's at least a week or before we can get that child assigned to a route and get them started in school. And we want to be more efficient and we want to cut that time down. That's just not, good enough for us right now. So we're working with 4K and looking forward to find ways to be more proactive in finding out what students need transportation as soon as possible, looking at those overflows, and hopefully with the three-tier system and we have flexibility, we can potentially create shuttle routes for schools, for 4K students.
Do our 4K students now, are they all in separate buses and separate transportation to the rest of the elementary?
No. So if they're full day 4K students, they ride yellow bus typically, as long as they are going to the school, the school that is in their attendance area. Once we get outside of that attendance area, we can't do yellow bus because it'll throw the general education population that's riding that bus. It'll throw the timing off if they have to go outside of an attendance area. That's where we have to try to either work. We have some 4K only vehicles, or we have to work with our special education, see what availability we have on special education transportation, and then slot those 4Ks there.
Do you have available the ride time for our students just overall? And I'm wondering about the ride time for our 4K students.
I don't have that offhand. Ultimately, we could look at I would pull all the 4K data for all the students that have transportation, and I can look at what the distance and the time of that ride is.
Okay, so moving forward, as we're thinking about next year, I'm wondering what is the goal for how long students are sitting on bus overall?
Mhm.
And 4K, you know, are in a
Yes.
different developmental
Yeah.
place. What is the goal for our 4K students as well?
Question.
I think as we start to talk about the long-range facilities plan, right, it'll be an interesting conversation to move forward with what are our beliefs about 4K in schools, because right now we have schools that don't have enough space to hold more 4K students. So then you overflow to another school, and then that school might not have enough space, and then you overflow to another school. So as we think sort of about what does our community look like, where are our families and children enrolling? It is, I know, and part of the next step on this one was to require a longer term discussion related to the availability of seats and what that looks like for programming district wide. So short term, we have this overflow process that's been in place and I think has been improved over the years, but it's an imperfect system. In terms, we just don't have some of the brick and mortar to support where all the needs for these little ones are. So that's just really nuts and bolts what happens. It's full. If it's a Lowell student, it's Lowell's full, they go to Lapham. If Lapham's full, I'm just making this up. If Lapham's full, then they might go to Hawthorne. And so then you have a little one on a bus from Lowell to Hawthorne. So it might not be exactly easy to figure out exactly what those times are, but logistics tell us it's gonna take longer
Oh, yeah.
for a little one to cross 30 and get over to Hawthorne from a Lowell attendance area. So that's just a boots on the ground story about how sometimes that looks.
Yeah, no other questions? Well, at this time, I'll turn it over to Beth to take us further into our patient survey.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. It's exciting to be here. So I am Beth Lade, she used she, her pronouns, and I am our leader of our research assessment and improvement team. So we're excited to talk to you about the work that we did to support Kenneth and his team around what we know about transportation. So next slide, Jess. Okay, so let me talk to you a little bit about sort of the structure and the responses of this survey. We worked with Kenneth and a group of folks here to think about what did we want to learn from our community about their experience with transportation this year. We administered a survey from March 4th to March 10th via email that was sent by communications on a link that folks could log in and got a really good response rate. We got about 3,500 responses in just over a week, which is wow, pretty high traffic for a survey from the district. In that survey, we had a suite of optional demographic questions that folks could answer. And what you see here, sort of in that bar graph on the bottom is just a snippet of what those responses are. And then I'll talk a little bit more about what that look like. What we see is that most respondents identified as family members and connected that way. But we saw that respondents were evenly distributed across grade levels. So we had about even representation in elementary, middle, and high. We see that over half of the respondents that identified First Student as their primary service providers. That would have been who would have been providing the transportation. 16% report Madison Metro and 3% report specialized services. And then 77% of respondents identified as white. And we saw no other race ethnicity comprised more than 10% of total responses. So a little bit of a snippet of who responded to that. Next slide. So let's talk about the questions. We had a few closed-ended questions that really looked at satisfaction. And you see on the bottom of this slide, there's a stacked bar graph there that kind of gets at those responses. I'll walk through those. Just to orient you to that graph, at the bottom, the text on the side is the question that participants would have responded to. And then it's a sliding sort of scale there. So the darker blue is your strongly agree. Lighter blue would be agree. So anything in that blue is positive to the question. Then you see that orange color is disagree and that dark orange is strongly disagree. So just a little contrast to orient there. So what does that mean in responses? What it means is we see about 48% of respondents were satisfied with MSD transportation services since the November start time change. That's was sort of what the question specified. On that second question, we see that 55% of respondents overall were satisfied with MSD schools' start and end times this year. When we look at this across different groups, we really see satisfaction was similar depending on the type of transportation, primarily access, whether for student or metro or other ways, you're seeing about similar trends to what we see with satisfaction. What we see also interestingly is that students and family respondents, so folks who indicated that in those demographic questions, expressed higher satisfaction with those start and end times compared to staff respondents. And when we talk about open-ended comments, you'll see a little more about what that may be. So next slide. Okay, so then if you're a qualitative person, this is the fun stuff. This is when folks had some chances to give us open-ended feedback through a couple questions. And what we did then is we took all of those responses and went through and sort of coded for areas that we deemed as like positive, sort of what are the things that folks were speaking of pretty positively about their experience, and then where are the places where we could see some growth. So the side on this slide, the text in green really highlights those positive responses. The text in the orange is focused on those areas of improvement, with the blocks at the bottom showing you example quotes to give a sense of what we need sort of across those themes. So starting on the left, you see that across these groups, we see themes that really highlight improvement over time, as well as satisfaction with interpersonal relationship with bus drivers. Lots of positive comments about sort of my bus driver and how they serve my child, and you can see that in that second quote. When we look at open-ended comments from families, we see that many remarked on the convenience of bus stops, as well as the appreciation for safety in this process. When we look at some of the staff responses, we see some really highlights on the problem solving and flexibility of school staff and the district in responding to the challenges throughout the year. So sort of that learning over time. So then looking on the right side, comments here around areas of growth include the need to improve consistency and timeliness of buses, increase the number of buses and routes, consider schedule changes, including later start times for elementary and earlier for middle school, and more driver training. And when we look at family respondents, we see them requesting more communication, including live time communication on bus ETAs. That's something y'all have discussed as well. And then staff also requested increased communication from the district and noted issues with discrepancies between the end of contract hours and bus arrival dismissal times. So who's kind of supervising that process. So the overview there, and I can pause or I can pass. Yeah, that's fine. Happy to talk.
Any questions? I think we're good.
All right, thank you, Beth. I think it's extremely important, you know, to get that feedback, both the positive and negative. And it's good to see that, you know, what the community needs and what they feel. I can say that we've made good strides in meeting those needs. I think we still have a ways to go. We're moving in the right direction. We will talk more towards some of those points that both the families and community and our school community have made later in the presentation. But at this time, I'd like to bring up John Billenmeyer, Regional President, for further and to discuss some of the things that our Partner First student has done.
Thank you, Ken. Good evening, Interim Superintendent Givestad, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Thank you for having us. The 9 of us are here today, both locally and for our corporate offices in Cincinnati, to show our commitment and our support to not only the Madison district, but also the Madison community. With me today, we have Claire Miller, the Chief Communications Officer, Jeff Gerks, the Chief Human Resources Officer, Renee Boydo, our Senior Director of Training, Steve Mentor, our Senior Principal Consultant of Electrification, Mary Lou Falk, our Manager Customer Success, Jason Kierna, our Regional Vice President, who you've met. These are the local folks. Liddell Cass, our Area General Manager, Heidi Koch, our Location Manager, and myself, John Billenmeyer, I'm the Senior Vice President. Thank you again for having us this evening. I'd like to talk a little bit, next slide, if we could, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about our journey to get to where we are today, and I will start off and acknowledge that and apologize that we did have some slips right out of the gate. But and I'll also agree with Ken that we still have quite a ways to go. But we have done some very good things, I think, and we've got momentum heading in our direction, and I think we're going to continue to show successes and continue to improve what we've already built. First off, there's nothing easy about transportation. Every decision that, not every, but most of the decisions you make in this room for the welfare of your students depend on whether or not they can make it to school. That success of that program depends on transportation. Take into account last year, the magnitude of a vendor change in transportation is a huge undertaking. We are coming into a new community. We are inheriting both the good and the negative things from the existing contractor. We hire the same drivers, the same group of people come in and work for us. So we have a culture change that we have to deal with in that first year. And really the bottom line comes down to our success on whether or not we can get enough drivers through the door. So we're going to talk a little bit about our lessons. Then we're going to talk about what we're doing moving forward and what we hope to accomplish and help the district accomplish together as we head into the next school year. So our first challenge that we faced was, of course, the late contract sign, which delayed our ability to get buses through the door and get transportation and really just get startup heading in the right direction. So we got off to a late foot there, but we did a lot of good things in making sure that we secured our facilities, that we brought in fleet, that we had everything we needed to start on the first day of school. The second issue that we really came into was having enough drivers to start school. Going from the triple tier to the double tier certainly had a challenge in us in hiring enough drivers, but then on top of that, we only hired on about 80% of the incumbent drivers from Madison. And again, the late sign-on challenged us as well with having enough time to get drivers for the first day of school. Fortunately, due to first student size and magnitude, we were able to bring in out-of-town drivers to supplement our shortage. And then in November, working and partnering up with the Madison School District, we were able to modify and reduce some routes to bring our service up to 98%. And then as well, it's already been mentioned this evening, we did bring in and increase our wages. So when we first took over, the drivers were making about $21 an hour to start. They are now up to $25 to start. And we have a full range. We also offered sign-on bonuses to entice drivers to come over and work for us. We have increased our recruiting and our hiring. To date, we have hired 48 drivers. And we are running about 40 more routes than what you were running last year. Next slide, please. Back one. Is there another slide? Sorry. Nope. Nope. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I had 3 slides. So our successes this year, we've gotten up to and maintained a 98% on-time performance in normal operating conditions. Since December, both AM and PM routes for 602 individual daily routes. We've increased driver wages by $5 to $8 an hour. We have brought in our first alt program for special education and TEP scholars running 228 trips a day. We've trained 120 drivers on our First Serves program. For students support serves for special education scholars. Sorry about that. Our First Serves program is for student support for special education scholars. We provide a routing support for route corrections and modifications, earned a grant for 5 electric buses, submitted for 25 more electric buses in the EPA round 3. And we received positive accolades for 14 school administrators. Earlier this fall or winter, we had a couple of our folks come in, Mary Lou being one of them, came in and met with principals one-on-one and sat down with them to understand what their problems and issues were and how we can remedy those. So getting in front of the principals to really understand at that level, what we can do better as far as communications, as far as service. And from that, we did get some very good feedback from the principals. 14 of which we're very happy with the progress we have made since the beginning. And at the bottom of this side, you'll see a program or a timeline on the programs that First Student has rolled out throughout the school year. So in September, we launched First Feedback, which is the community's resource to give us feedback on how we're performing. In November, we provided our First Service training to 120 drivers. In December of 2023, our First View District Dashboard. February, our First Acts Principal Training. And also Parent View Pilot at Henderson Elementary. So that is our driver app that we rolled out to Henderson and piloting there. Then we rolled out Parent View to the entire district in March. And then in April of 2024, we launched First Acts. So we are working on the launch of First Acts right now. I will pause there for any questions that you may have of First Student.
I think you have
One more slide.
Oh, I do have, sir. Next slide. Oh, there's the slide there's that missing slide. So forward looking. What we're working with the district on now as we head towards August of next year. Delivering a superior ridership experience for MMSD's diverse scholar population. Launch a strategic plan to educate community and stakeholders. So when you talk about transparency and moving forward, they know what First Student is working on in relation and hand with the district. Continue collaboration with MMSD's transportation and communication leaders. Partner with MMSD to become a crucial driver of the district's sustainability plan. Again, 5 electric buses, and we've already applied for 25 more. Develop a plan to expand work with Madison schools and community recreation program. And collaborate with MMSD on a comprehensive startup plan for the fall, outlining where our shortcomings were this year and making sure that we have stopgaps in place to ensure that we are successful as we head into the next school. Now I will pause for any questions.
I think we're good.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I just like to add to, I think one of the things that I'm extremely proud of is collaboration and work between First Student Transportation, our communications department, central office around the technology pieces and communication pieces. I think that one of the things that I speak more heavily to is the First Serves program. We met with some of the associate superintendents and our behavioral support staff leadership in talking through ways that we can align MMSD behavioral policy along with how the drivers and attendants react to things. I think one of the things that we want to make sure is that the same language and the same things that the youth that we're using with students in the classroom are the same training and things that the drivers and attendants are using with those same students on the bus. So we want to make sure that the bus is truly an extension of the classroom, and we're working with them to make sure that happens. One of the things that was very impressive to me was the interaction between some of our associate superintendents and First Students leadership team around, these school-based things. That's not an area where, I hang my hat. So to me, they were almost speaking a different language, but I can see that it was very productive. So I think that is great to see, and moving forward to make sure that we're aligning the school and the school bus in the same direction. Next slide, please. So I want to just talk briefly about Madison Metro. As Superintendent Kavista said, we work closely with Metro as well to look at where we are and where we need to go to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students. Some of the things that we looked at is how many Dodger routes we're currently running for our high schools, the effectiveness of those routes. We've actually, with the onboarding of, or the opening of Cap High, we added two Dodgers to meet the needs of those students because they come from different areas of the city to one location. We wanted to make sure that we created a form of transportation that could align with getting those kids from the out. Because the school is more of an centralized location of the city, we wanted to make sure the students that lived in the Follett and East attendance area, as well as the Memorial and West High School area, had the same level of transportation to get to school on time. So we worked with the city to create those 2 routes, bringing us to 34 routes for our high school students on Metro. Metro has operated at a roughly 91% on-time rate since the beginning of the school year, roughly from late September till now, which is a positive. It's a positive thing because they have also had some of the same strengths with drivers as the nation has. So we continue to work with them to make sure that we bolster that on-time percentage and that we are meeting the needs of our families and students. One of the things that is like most important, I believe, is what is Metro going to look like going forward in the next year? We've worked with them to look at some things that they have to do. Looking at our current Dodger schematics, there's some things that have been concerning to the Federal Transit Administration. So Metro has been very preemptive in making sure that they've written letters to them to look at ways to verify that our Dodger routes are truly in line with federal regulations. So we're looking right now, we're awaiting that decision, but it looks promising that, what Metro and the district has proposed to the Federal Transit Administration is in line with the Code of Federal Regulations and the Federal Transit Authority regulations. So I don't foresee any issues there. However, we do have a couple routes that are quite far out, on the outskirts of the city. We may have to bring those in, but we won't be able to really talk to that in more detail until we get that finding back from Metro and Federal Transit Authority. But we will continue to utilize and partner with Madison Metro. I think just outside of the high school routes, the bus pass program has been very successful for our students, low income students. So we want to make sure that we continue to make sure that we're providing as much transportation resources for our entire population, especially the high school population, some of our middle school population through Metro. Next slide. So I want to talk about kind of through this year and even in the past year, what we've learned. We've learned that based on market conditions, we need to move to a 3-tier. I think it's not what we hope for and anticipated going into this year, but due to the market conditions to drive the national driver shortage, this is actually pushing us as well as several other districts in that same direction. And as we spoke to earlier, we're really looking at taking a deep dive into what we do and how we do it here at MMSD as far as transportation, making sure that we are in line with our policy. And then based on the 23-24 school year, we want to make sure that we are bringing industry best standards, right? So I think that was something that going into the RFP, into the contract, that was a big thing. We want to make sure that we're honoring that. And as we've talked about briefly, we have moved in that direction with the bringing in our Parent View app, which is live right now. We have over 500 families that are currently logged in and tracking students. We want to continue to bolster that up and make sure that our families are aware of that and taking advantage of that, tracking their yellow buses. Also, like our First Acts. So that is the online platform for our incident reporting. Prior to this year, we had a very manual process where our carriers would fill out, paper incident reports on behavior that was not in line with MMSD standards or the carrier standards. They would submit that to the principals via email. If you have 4 buses, 60, 70 kids per bus, that's a lot. And there's several incidents, that's a lot. That's a lot on our principals to try to take in, decipher, and act on that, as well as our carriers. So we utilize First Students platform, First Acts. It's a digital platform where all of the school principals and their designated staff have access to digital incident reports that flow over quicker. It allows them to take action, both the carrier, the administration, and the principals can see each step in the process. So that's gonna help us to streamline it. One of the things that, unfortunately, that has happened in previous years is the drivers fill these out and they don't see any movement. So then they think that no one's doing anything. So we want to make sure that we're moving in a direction where we're supporting our drivers. I think that's been talked about, that our schools are happy with our drivers. We want to make sure our drivers are happy with the schools and making sure that they know that they're supported and making sure that the bus is a safe environment for all of our students. First Acts is going to help us do that long term. And lastly, First Serves. I think one of the things that we talked about with First Serves is its primary focus seems to be special education. But one of the things that in our discussion is this is a broader platform that can be used across our entire district with regard to transportation. And I think that's going to help us in making sure that our principals are supported, our drivers are supported, and then that communication between school staff, drivers, our department, and their leadership team and the carrier's leadership team, we're all speaking the same language when it comes to our students. So that's definitely going to help. Next slide, please. So just want to talk about the transportation plan for 2024-25. So as we've talked about, we will be going to, we do feel that it's necessary to go to a full 3-tier routing system. This will slightly modify our bell times. And as we talked about, we have the Parent View app, which is live, First Acts incident reporting, which is now live, and we'll continue to work on First Serves to make sure that we are in line with the mission and things that were promised during the RFP and the contract signing. Next slide, please. So we want to talk about why a 3-tier system, right? What are the advantages of it? Consequently, by having a 3-tier system, it allows us to not have as crowded buses. This is going to create a more safe environment. We know that we would love to have an attendant on every bus, but that's just not the case. Market conditions are driving that. So we want to make sure that we are not packing buses full and we're making an environment where a driver can safely operate that bus. Children are safely seated in the bus, and this driver can oversee student engagement. Decrease in crowding. This also allows for a pool of drivers. So in this model, it'll allow us for a greater pool of rescue drivers or drivers to add when we see that buses are getting to capacity. In this model, we've already been able to create more routes in schools that were trying for it this year where we could not provide it. So in this model that we're going to, it's adding buses. It's adding buses to schools like Olson, potentially. It's adding buses to Chavez. It's adding buses to West. These are some of the schools that were crying out the most and saying, hey, we feel our buses are overcrowded or at capacity, which was the reality. This will give us this flexibility to say, hey, we can work with their team and we need to add a new route and split a route to deal with the capacity issues. Also, in having that pool of drivers, our goal is to have it allow us to fulfill more of the mission that we've committed to for our MSER programming. We're looking at a potential 4th tier. So that 4th tier, although MSER is considered a charter, we want to make sure that we have drivers available that after they have completed their school routes, that they can also come back and then take care of our after school programs. This year, we've seen the fact of starting in the 2-tier and going to a modified 3-tier, we haven't really been able to add more drivers and add more transportation for MSER. So it is our sincere hopes that going to this 3-tier, we'll be able to add more transportation services for our after school. And as Lisa stated, our 24-25 start times will be announced April, once we finalize the tiering. Pause, any questions?
Thank you for the update. Thank you for all of the work to kind of give us more context about all of the work that has been done this year. To find some solutions to a bumpy start. I guess what I'm wondering is, based on the plan for 24-25, do you think that some of the things that you just mentioned, Kenneth, about the 3-tier and just some of the other kind of improvements that you're working on, do you think those will address some of the dissatisfaction that was evident in the survey? Because I appreciate that we lean towards the positive. But when we've got, 48% of folks, they're satisfied, means there's slightly over 50 who are not. Do you know what I mean? So it's a pretty much of a 50-50 type of response. So I'm just curious if you could just speak to like what in the 24-25 do we think is gonna potentially change dissatisfaction to more satisfaction?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest factors is being on time, right? I think that's been a challenge based upon having to constantly change routing scenarios often. To deal with the fact that we may have been short drivers in a certain time for time frame or a week. So I think having that pool of extra drivers to make sure that we're meeting those needs is going to address any potential gaps. I think when going into this year, we know more, so we can do more, and then we're gonna close those gaps. I think a lot of the dissatisfaction still lingers because of the start. So I think having a smoother start going into 24-25 will help bolster, confidence back in transportation. I think one of the bigger things is communication still, right? So I want to make sure that it's understood that having these platforms and having now parents can track situations when there is a late bus. These things are going to happen. I mean, transportation is just, unfortunately, it's not perfect. Any type of transportation. But I think parents knowing if a bus is going to be 5 or 10 minutes late due to an accident, due to weather, things of that nature will help them be a little bit more preemptive, and know that there is a bus coming and be able to track that live to know exactly where that bus is. One of the things that I know that I've heard through First Student reaching out to some of the schools and parents contacting us directly is that now they appreciate the fact that they can look on their phone, or their students can look on their phone and say, hey, my bus is 5 minutes away from me. Where before I have no information, there's no communication. So I think that will help a lot, that there'll be more live communication. These platforms also will allow us to speak to some of the dissatisfaction on our school sites, because they were not getting timely information as well. Teachers are still waiting on their students. Why? When are they going to get there? There's a lesson plan in play. We're 5 minutes late for school. So that sets them behind. Now knowing that, that we have the capabilities for schools to also be able to look through district view, that's something we're going towards. That will help the schools to be able to have more communication on, instead of waiting for us to get it to them, which is not always, a very timely thing sometimes. So I think to speak to those two things, that will really help to move that number in the right direction going into 24-25.
Great. Thank you for that. And do you imagine that starting with the 24-25 school year, that enrollment into these transportation platforms will become part of our enrollment process? Or how do we take a more proactive approach to get students and families registered or logged into these platforms, instead of it being those that are the most skilled at navigating these things.
Right. So actually, right now, we do have the information on how to log into that's on our website. That's one. We did roll out a communication, our initial communication to our comms department that went out district wide. We are actually now working on our second path of communication to families through our schools. I think we found that it's more impactful when it's coming directly from the principal to the parents versus the district-wide communication. So working with comms right now to hopefully have something next week to roll out for principals to copy and paste into their newsletters to send this out again. So one of the things this First Student has, and it's on our website, they have 24-hour customer service to help families if there are any issues with the startup process. So we have put that, we've actually even bolstered our IC. So now there's information that's coupled with the Parent View app and IC to track bus to get that information. What's the bus number? What's the bus code? So we're increasing, we're making it easier and easier and easier for families to navigate it because we understand not everybody's tech savvy, but we want to make it as easy as possible. And over the last probably 2 months after the pilot, we found that we've done better every time. So.
Okay.
And I also think it's about like, just add to like, thinking about how we also embed that information like in the enrollment process, because we know for a lot of our families, that is probably the most beneficial time when they're going through the enrollment process, when they are thinking about all the different things. So having this to say, use this app, here's here, like, yeah, it's on our website, it's in our newsletter, but a lot of our families are not really getting into the newsletter and looking at all the information that's in there. So just think about how we have a better rollout for families to just use the app, because the app is beneficial, but only for those who are really taking advantage of it.
Exactly.
And we're also prepared to use our social media platforms to pull that information out as well.
I was just gonna say a couple of things. I agree with Kenneth that we do expect that the level of satisfaction will increase, especially with opting out, to give us a better idea. Some of the complaints that really centered around buses being really crowded, so this should address that. One thing that it won't address, some of our staff and certainly some of our families believe that we end school too late. And unfortunately, at this point in time, based on where we're at, we are not able to change that yet. And so I know that particular piece of parents who would like to not have their kids get out as late, that's still going to be a pain point for some of our families. And the other thing I wanted to add too that we talked about was just double checking that the applications are really bilingual. And not just a translated bilingual, but actually bilingual. So that's another piece that we have to work on. I can tell you that I'm very excited that as a principal could open the computer or the secretary and know exactly where the buses are for their school. That is going to be really a helpful tool. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Can I have one additional question? Okay, thank you. So thank you for answering that. I do want to go back to your audit. I'm sorry I didn't ask this earlier at that time. There are a couple of places in the audit, for instance, with internal transfers. The next step is to ensure that all internal transfer students are in compliance with current Board of Education policy. There's another reference to Board of Education policy with DLI. So I think what I'm wondering is we have policy and there have been perhaps practices that have been implemented over the years that have kind of set a set of maybe expectations and a way of working. It sounds to me from the audit that they weren't maybe in alignment with policy, but they probably, I'm guessing, have been family friendly
Yes.
accommodations and adjustments that we have made. So when I see next step is to ensure that we're gonna get back to policy, I read that as, that might get us in compliance with our policies, but it sounds to me like that could be a pretty dramatic change for families.
Mhm.
And, I'm curious, like, what that communication looks like, sounds like, how much advance notice do families get about an accommodation or an adjustment that they have grown used to that may now no longer be available? Because I think one of the things that we get as board members is that when those kind of changes happen, even if they are to get us in compliance with our own policies, families reach out via email, you know, kind of talking about either the way it was rolled out or the hardship that it now causes when they've had something in place prior. So you may not have an answer to that right now, but I guess the things where I see Board of Education policy outlined, I would want to hear more about like, what is the proactive kind of family-centered communication about how this change is gonna take place?
So, I'm gonna answer that for Ken, that's okay. So a number of these, you will see there's an asterisk next to them, so internal transfer, alternative address, specialized transportation, solo ride, DLI. The reason we put that asterisk next to this, because for all of those, a communication plan needs to be developed. And so I am gonna be working with our comms department so that we can notify all of the impacted families by next month. So we're gonna communicate, first we're gonna make sure we identify all of them. We're very clean, some of them, you already have a couple that came over from last year where we said, we're gonna revisit this, we're gonna communicate with you. So we're gonna begin to develop those communications for them so that they do have it by the end of it.
Let me give you a little context as well. As the person that was responsible for doing several of those family-friendly things in years past, right? So it typically, if we had space on the bus, if we could accommodate, we would do it.
Yeah.
And it was with good intentions, and it's led us to a very difficult position where we just don't have the space on our routes. I did some research in calling around to other districts, big school districts, other districts, and we are still going to be accommodating to many parents that don't have that in other districts. And I'm talking about we have a 1.5 mile limit versus a 2 mile limit. And we also allow a lot of variance in drop off places, Monday, Wednesday, every other Friday. And every time you increase that family friendly, it can create problems in the system. So I think we'll still be family friendly, but we just don't have the capacity to do kind of, if there's room, we will do it. So I don't know if that helps, but as a person that did several of those, I've really been thinking a lot about it.
Okay.
And if I could just add too, I mean, one of the things is through this internal audit process, we've brought in multiple departments. We have our social workers who work directly with our families who are involved in this too. So they're helping us in cascading that information once the communication plans are finalized.
I think what this illustrates to me is that, right, first student is a piece of our whole transportation system. Right? The majority of little ones that we transport on the affectionately known as Big Yellows are first student riders. But we found when we did this audit that it was sort of this perfect storm last year, right? New provider, nationwide shortage, new routes across the city, Metro cut some routes. They had a shortage. And what happened internally was that families that were used to the routing or kiddos getting on at different addresses, walking across, getting on over here, like all of those practices suddenly got like fruit basket upset. And our own system internally had a hard time sort of managing what might have been exceptions or special situations, those sort of hit us. Right? And I think we've learned that we have to get after this communication earlier. Help families to either develop a plan to get transported, figure out the why, but behind every exception, there's a why, right? There's a little one that's got a reason why. So it's gonna be important for us to understand and know and communicate. The city talked to us about that too. Because some of with the metro routes changing, right? We actually had some kids getting on some middle school kids were getting on high school routes and overcrowding the high school routes when the middle school kids should have gotten on the big yellows. So, I mean, it was just
It's
this.
revealed a lot of.
Yeah, it really did. So we just want to let you know, we own this as part of our own system. That we are trying to tease this apart as best we can, but as TJ said, the key to this really is going to be communication. We get to figure that out earlier now than we did before, by no one's fault. But we feel like we can get after where some of the pain points were to create a system that's more stable.
If I could add, first off, thank you for acknowledging that. That's kind of what I was alluding to, a new vendor in the first year, learning these ins and outs. Now, we can work with you and identify those circumstances that you would approve and require. We can work with you, but coming into the new system, it was different. We were learning as we went into some of those situations, which created a difficult situation for us as well. More than happy to, as we head into next year, if we identify those one-offs that you need to make that exception for, we will work with you and we will put them in our system and it will work just fine. It's just when we find out as we're going, you know, building the plane as you're flying, it's a pretty difficult way to learn. More than happy to work and come up with solutions for you.
Well, I will just state, I guess, a preference that I have. And I wanna try to be clear about like my role as a board member is trying to stay like in the governance part of this and not in the day-to-day. And I also feel like when you're looking at a 50-50% satisfaction, dissatisfaction, like that also feels like an important thing as a board member to stay abreast of. And so my preference would be, as you all developing the communication, particularly around board policy being upheld, it would be great in a weekly update to see what the communication is going to be. And I say that not because I necessarily want to edit it, but it's important for me as a board member to know exactly how the board policy is being referenced to family members. And yeah, just how we're planning to, I guess, to enforce the policy in a way that still feels really humanizing for families. And there is one policy related piece on here that I don't know if your audit discovered, which is we have a couple of schools that have a higher percentage of students who are experiencing not being housed, right? Some range of being doubled up, some range of homelessness. Speaking of this larger transportation system, we know that for families who are in transitional kind of housing experiences, they also are relying on taxi cabs. I know that's different than the bus piece tonight, but because they also may live in neighborhoods where they're, I don't know, they could be below the 1.5, but it's a hardship to walk, or there's just other issues. I am curious, and this wouldn't be anything you had to speak to tonight, but I'm just curious in the larger transportation system, how we're also thinking about our students who qualify for TEP. And so, I don't see that on the audit, and so I just,
It is.
You all could just be,
It is.
oh,
part-
was it?
Yeah, we,
Okay.
Yes,
You didn't highlight them per
correct. These
se.
were the ones that we had. So like we didn't have any major findings that were gonna cause like change. So when we looked into them,
Okay,
so there was a total of 12 different areas that were reviewed across for the whole inside.
okay,
we've actually done better on that side of the house with the addition to First Alt. Because they've been able to bring a lot of drivers into the fold.
okay,
Through that program, and that is specifically and expressly geared towards that population. So
Okay.
we've actually seen a better, one of the things in talking to a lot of the social workers were like, hey, our TEP kids they're already at a disadvantage and they're getting to school late because of the issues that
right,
some of our local non-contracted carriers that we use are having. So bringing First Alt, it's more predictability, stability in the rides has actually brought a better on-time percentage for those TEP students.
okay,
And we've been able to provide more timely and as that population is also fortunately.
Yeah.
We've been able to meet those needs, but we want to make sure that that we're making a therapy plan so we continue to meet those needs if that population can grow.
okay. Thank you so much for being able to speak to that. That concludes my,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, I just had two things building off the dissatisfaction, at least from some of the feedback that I received was the unreliability and inconsistency of service at the beginning of the year. So buses not showing up, buses being late, the wrong route taken, all those things for a variety of reasons. So I think to Nichelle's point, I think the communication is key. And so kind of in the policy or in the agreement, having a standard for when communication will be timely reported. You know, there are reports of families not learning of buses arriving late or early, like right in the moment. So they had no plans to adjust. And so just a standard of communicating with families. So it's timely and so people can adjust. The other thing that I think would be useful for me to know to just evaluate kind of the health of the system is kind of like a bus driver per route metric that we can receive. So we know when maybe such and such bus driver can't make it for whatever day, that there's some slack in the system. So that route is covered. And that bus drivers don't have to double up on routes, you know, because one part of it is bus drivers are learning new routes, mistakes get made, things like that. Yeah, so I think a bus driver per route metric could be helpful for us to know.
And we are able to provide that on a weekly basis. We take a look at what our driver stats are. And we do get that information over to Ken, so we can make that more widely available. Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay.
So I'm thinking about the conversation around the 3-tier versus the 2-tiers. And since I wasn't on the board and that initial conversation was taking place, I wanted to ask my fellow board members who were. I know there were a lot of reasons for the benefit of our students why we wanted to move to a 2-tier system. Was that a decision that the board made? Was that a decision that the administration made? How did that play out?
I'm sorry, Laura, are you asking board members who were on the board at the time that this decision made, how that decision came about?
I'm wondering, yeah, because I'm hearing that the administration is deciding that we're going to have a 3-tier system moving forward. And my understanding was that that conversation was with the board to decide to move to a 2-tier system.
My recollection of that conversation was that the board's real interest was in shifting the start time for middle school students. And I think there are folks who have been doing this work for a very long time, particularly you, Mike, who would be kind of the initial shift. So if you go back to last year, we had 6 schools that started pretty early in the morning, around 7:30, which is developmentally inappropriate for the best kind of learning conditions for our middle school youth. And we had 6 schools all of them located on the west side of the city that started closer to 9 o'clock. And the real shift was kind of getting in alignment with best practice and hoping that we were gonna align with transportation that could fulfill that shift for all of our students at the middle school level. I think the complexity now, kind of hindsight 2020, is that so much work had gone into getting the first 6 schools to 9 o'clock. And the shift was really about first student advocating for the capacity to do that work. Where that aligns with kind of whether we're at 3 tiers or at 2 tiers wasn't prioritized in that conversation. It was more related to start time, if I recall correctly. Mike, I'm curious, since you've been around since we started this work, what your response is?
So the main catalyst to switch to the 2 tiers was parents that were not wanting middle school students to get on the bus at like 20 to 7 or 25 to 7. So that was the main catalyst. We approached Madison Metro at the time and would have had them do it, but the only thing they could do was switch the middle school and the high schools around, which would not have solved the problem. The reason why the board was involved in that conversation initially was because there was an increase in cost. Because we were switching, at the same time, we were taking our students off of Madison Metro and moving to Yellow Bus, so we were adding Yellow Bus routes. And that was the main catalyst for the conversation with the board. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, it provides some context for me. So I'm wondering if this conversation is leading, in my mind, it's leading me to think that we can't do it, or that we're not looking into the future and getting back to that goal of having the middle school start times be later. Is that correct?
So middle school start times currently are later right now.
Okay.
Right. And so I think a better way to look at it would be, we can't do the 2 tiers right now.
Okay.
I think, you know, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I think there's a lot of interest. We would love to go on back to the 2 tiers. But the capacity of the system and the restraints on the drivers, we can't do it. And so that's why we had gone to the 3 tier and I could talk a lot about it. I did a lot of research on it. You know, there are many districts around the country that are currently operating 3 tier. And you see that in larger school districts. That they just don't have the number of drivers that they used to have. They are not able to do it in 2 tiers.
So our start times, we're wanting them to be based on those negotiations that were 3 years ago.
I believe that the main catalyst in what was driving our decision was to have a later start time for middle school kids. So in respect to that, yes. And as I addressed Michelle's question before, I think some of the parents weren't quite as late. I think that's a fair statement.
Okay, that's all my questions for it. Thank you for that.
Board Member Moser Felton.
Thanks.
I have 3. I have 3. The first one is that increasing driver wages $5 to $8. Is that on the hourly wage, or is that taking into account the spending?
That is on the hourly, it's not taking.
Thanks. My second question, I think, Kenneth, for you is, as start times were shifting around as we were responding to the problems of the beginning of the year, I remember there was like a bunch of conversation about middle school crossing guards. And whenever you get a chance, including in a weekly update in the future, I would love to hear like what all happened with that. And then the third thing is reminding the MMSD team and the First Student team that a lot of young people wrote to the board and came out to give public comment about these issues.
And as you think about launching a strategic plan to educate community and stakeholders, like some of those stakeholders are second graders, who are not watching this board meeting, but who did say, hey, this is a way in which my school system is affecting me in a new way, and I'm gonna engage. There's opportunities there, and this is an operations work group meeting, but there's opportunities there to bring some of this back to the level that a second grader at Henderson or rising eighth grader at the Senate can say, oh, I can actually learn more about how my city school district is making decisions and how this works. That feels really real life to them. So as you think about that strategic plan, like, here's some of the stakeholders, kids, who I think we should go back to, especially the ones who wrote in and say, hi, I'm a seventh grader. This is what I think. Really closing the circle on that can be a big deal. And I think that we should consider it. And that's.
And I can speak to that last part. We have a communications department at First Students. We're highly connected with TJ and team as well as Kenneth. And very much you'll see the first square in our communications plan is students. We have a safety dog that's going to make a bus stop tour here next year in our district here. And also we have a lot of educational materials, coloring books and school bus safety and stuff. And we'll have a website too, the kids can go to. So very much want to engage the children. That also the communication plan is very important for us to have a driver component. We want to communicate to the drivers and we want to champion the drivers to the parents and to our community, build them up. And we have a lot of driver heroes. You all know that because they live here and work here. And so we want to champion them in our communication so that they are even more part of your family and our family. And very importantly, parents are part of that communication plan and so on. But I do want to say, I appreciate you saying that because the students are the first place that we started with our communications plan.
Right, and it's about getting the transportation right for them, but it's also about, hey, you came to a school board meeting, and maybe that's more on the MMSD side, like.
I like that one, that we do finally roll out the electric school buses. That might be a really good time to engage with the students and show them that their voices are being heard. That these buses are kind of a result of the activity, the action that they've taken. It takes courage to do that, right?
I think that's valuable.
And I'd like to speak to your second question because we did meet with the city. So, I mean, it's a broader conversation than just transportation. We also have to bring in our Office of School Safety who works with our city to provide crossing guards. Ultimately, from what we are hearing is historically, the city has only provided crossing guards at the elementary school level. With some of the constraints that they're seeing, they don't foresee being able to do that going forward. So, you know, I think just to so that you know that we heard the school community and the family around safety, and we're trying to provide the most safest, you know, transportation routing and areas for kids, you know, within the city. But there's only so much that's within our control, but we are working with the city as much as possible or in our Office of School Safety to figure out other paths if possible.
Like other walking routes.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the challenge with crossing guards is there were actually some schools where the crossing guards were already there serving elementary schools and they were a combination school. So they naturally helped middle school kids. And so when start times changed, it did not work out to have that wide of spread time. And a shortage of, again, people that want to be out there at all weather.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one thing in response to Blair. So Blair, on our city county schools collaborative committee, that is MMSD, all the county board supervisors, we actually, the crossing guard issue came up at that committee. And so city staff came and presented to us about the number of schools, partnership through MMSD, the number of schools that are hey, you guys need to check this out. And then they sent out some of their staff, like, actually like with middle school students, like ways to cross the road, like going through to the crossing walk, or cross traffic. Kind of, so they did some education with the students, they gave them some like records. They started thinking about other ways to kind of have students group together to cross the street, so yeah, so they didn't necessarily have an answer to like just automatically increase crossing guards because of that elementary piece. But I felt like they did a really nice job of like letting us know that they do have a process for evaluating like pedestrian safety after school. And they work with our MMS team to kind of
The other thing,
safety.
the other thing that there's, I think the city has become more responsive. And like, for instance, when you go up Seagull Road, there are now 2 or 3 of those where you push the button and the flashing lights come on. They've been much more aggressive in putting them up around areas where they're unsafe for kids. I think they did one on Willow Street. I was really pleased to see that.
We have seen it increase. I mean, I can say, cause it's my neighborhood in the Orchard Ridge, Tokenie, those areas. We've actually seen, they've increased the number of crossing guards because of the traffic. They increased the high speeds, 3 to 4 or 4 lane, or 2 lane on each side. So there's actually a need, you know, for those areas to have more crossing guards. So, you know, the Raymond South Whitney exchange, the Russet Road South Whitney exchange, and the Raymond Balsam exchange there, they've increased. That's just one area because that's my traveling path. I see every day they those crossing guards in that area. So that's a positive.
Thanks for the info. I appreciate it.
Question? Good. All right. Moving on to referendum community feedback and budget feedback.
All right, that would be me. I'm up for that. So.
Thanks, y'all.
Real quick, thank you all
Yeah.
very much.
I gotta have it. Yep.
Thank you.
First.
Thank you for the role.
No, I'm back. I agree. That just take. I can.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, Kenneth. Okay, we have good stuff to share. Can I just say that? So we're gonna be talking all about community feedback for the referendum. So if we can go to the next slide, let me give you a reminder because we've seen some of this before. So we've done 3 types of engagement. We had a think tank in February with our community leaders. We've done community surveys and we've done in-person and virtual community engagement sessions. So we're going to talk about all 3 of those. I'll remind you about the processes we used. And from all of those, we got some big themes. So the big themes are the 1, we prioritize our staff. We need to address critical building needs. And then talking about how we communicate about the referendum. So communication, obviously, that's not a surprise to see those. So let's go to the next one, which is the think tank. So as a reminder, in mid-February, we gathered community leaders together and did a think tank with them where we asked them to come and give us their feedback. We worked with the Wisconsin Center for Education Research, WCER, with their subgroup, WEC, Wisconsin Evaluation Collaborative, a lot of acronyms. So with WEC, we had some great folks that we worked with, Molly Carroll and Shahana McKinney. So we worked closely with them to lead the work. They then brought in a whole group of facilitators. And we presented about our budget. We presented about some possible referendum work that we were exploring. And then also talked about the teaching and learning goals that we had. So that was the first taste of the bottom show with Cindy Green and others. From there, then they broke into small groups. And in those small groups, they engaged in conversation in which there was a WEC facilitator, there was a WEC note keeper, there were no central office folks. Okay, so it's a place where they could have open, honest dialogue and conversation. We had 35 folks join us across very different sectors. And we talked about teaching and learning, we talked about budget, we talked about business. Okay. Some of the big things that came up, you can see on the slide there. I don't want to repeat those, but I want to use some of the words that were embedded in the WEC report. So one, there's a huge caring for our students. So they care about the immediate needs of our kids, mental health needs, the challenging reality that some of our kids are facing right now. There's a deep care for our teachers. So they referenced the needs of our staff. They talked about turnover. They talked about recruitment and retention, teacher prep for helping, for teaching a diverse student population that we have in MMSD. They wanted to keep the focus on literacy and early literacy, and they applauded the work that we were doing in 4K and wanted more of that full day 4K. They wanted to cultivate stronger relationships with our community, particularly the nonprofits and the private sector. And they wanted to talk about how we're addressing those funding issues as well. They really wanted to see better communication about the funding. So they want to know more. They want to know why we have these funding gaps and how we can rectify those. So that's some of the things that came up with teaching and learning. With the budget, we talked about the difference between this 4-year and the 20-year referendum. And we wanted to hear what they had to say. So the 20-year, they really thought was a large commitment, but they did think that the community would be behind it. Okay. Now, they also know that there's some flexibilities that come in with that referendum, and they were excited about that. But that was also tethered by the cost of the 20-year referendum, and just some concerns about that, especially thinking about our families who are from low economic backgrounds and how they may or may not be able to afford that. There were some who weren't in favor of a referendum, and they suggested different ways the district could investigate more creative ways to find funding. In addition, while they were talking about the budget, they talked about teacher salary as being a driving force for retention and recruitment, and the need to have high quality and diverse group of teachers. We talked about the PD and teacher well-being, and that we needed to invest in district leadership and have a stable superintendent who's here for the long term. Remember, this is before we decided who our new superintendent was. And then finally, they referenced facilities as a priority. So in terms of the facilities, they talked about, staggering replacements, figuring out how we fix the buildings that need support, a system that we need to rank improvements they discussed, as well as having pride in our learning environments. And they did also talk about the career and tech education opportunities that they want to see. So that's a smattering of what we heard in those meetings. I will say that how we got all that data was WEC, after doing those interviews, or focus groups, collecting all of the data, they went and they analyzed it all. There were, I think, over 200 pages of data that they combed through to get those themes. And then gave us a report, which you all saw in the weekly update. We have also sent that report back to the members who were at that think tank to get their feedback. So they also received it late Friday, I believe. And to be determined where we're going there next, but our intent is to go back with them and work with them. All right, so that's the gist. I do want to also just put a plug in. So thinking about some of the things that they talked about, the public schools, Madison Public Schools Foundation is having an event on February, we're not in February anymore, Jen.
We're in April.
We're in April, April 25th. It's 7:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's their second annual Schools Make Madison Summit. So it's free, but you got to register. So you go to their website, you can register. The topics that they're talking about are about getting grounded in the reality of school finance with someone we might know in that conversation. We have school social workers, so there's a panel of 6 social workers that are going to be there talking about how they meet this urgent needs. And then talking about nourishing. So there's a really great group of folks that'll be there. It's just one example of how some of our partners are helping work with us to address some of the things that we heard come up in this think tank. Great, I'm gonna keep moving us. So thinking about the other part that we had, so we did this think tank, but then we also had a survey. That survey was out from February 15th to March 11th. It was offered in English, Spanish, and Hmong. It was an open survey that we used, and you've all heard me talk about this survey the last couple of years. Hats off to Research Assessment and Improvement because they developed the survey, they administered it, they analyzed it, and they put together all of the information that you're seeing in the next slides. So thank you so much, Beth. The survey also, in addition to an open call to our community, it went to our middle school students and our high school students. And we designed it to be very short because we wanted to get a nice number of folks to apply. Next slide. So the survey got 2,027 responses. So you can see on the slide there who some of those folks were. We asked people to reference one or more of the relationships with MMSD. So you might have some overlap there. I want to note that about half of those responses, just a little over 1,000, came in on one day, on March 6th. So just a note on that, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Demographic information was optional for folks to apply to. So I can tell you that of those who submitted their demographics, roughly 83% of these respondents were white. 84% live in the MMSD attendance area. 77% reside in the city of Madison. 82% own their own homes, and 94% are registered voters. Let's go to the next slide. So here's some of the results. They were asked to talk about facilities, and they were asked to talk about operations. So they had 3 total questions. 2 were on facilities, 1 was on the operational referendum. So for facilities, the survey asked them, do you support a long-term 20-year referendum for facilities? And the second question was, do you support prioritizing middle school investments? So we wanted to get a first glance at that. What we can see here is that 62%, so that's 926 folks, indicated a support for the 20-year referendum. So those are in blue that you see up there. We know that 60%, 906, supported prioritizing middle school investments. So that's good chunks, good chunks. Now, caveat, both questions had a sizable amount of people who were undecided. Okay, so 30% and 31%. Under 10% of the folks who responded were either probably or definitely not planning to support these initiatives. For the operations, we asked one question about the level of priority for funding for district operations. And the vast majority, 78%, indicated a high support, 12% indicated a moderate support, and then we had about only 5% undecided, and 2% said it's a low priority, and 2% said not a priority. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to dig into the themes, and that's going to get us back into that part where we talked about we had so many survey results in one day. So in addition to that quantitative marking, we had qualitative feedback for each question. So we had questions for facilities and operations, and then we talked about some of the other themes that we saw in those. In facilities, we had 744 people respond to the open-ended question. And a majority of those responses did not necessarily pertain to the referendum specifically. So about 400, so that's 52% of those responses, they dealt with a demand for a 4.12 COLA increase in staff So in addition, there were more generic comments on the need to invest in staff. In addition to or before investing in facilities. Other comments that were in the facilities included themes around basic infrastructure update needs, prioritizing facilities based on need, equity, and the need to learn from our. And there was a smaller but noticeable number of comments that pertain to accessibility, to maintenance, custodial support, and athletic needs. Okay, so now let's talk about the operations, open-ended question. So with operations, we had 711 responses to that open-ended question. Most of those comments pertain to attracting and retaining teachers. So similar to the facilities question, 400 of the comments that we had for operations related to the 4.12 COLA base increase. Nearly all of those comments came from individuals who are identified as a current or former MMSD employee and whose comments seem to follow a pattern or a standard template. Let me use quotes here. Quote, focus on staff retention with a 4.12% cost of living adjustment, end quote. Other comments that were in there reference competitive wages, retaining high quality staff, smaller class sizes, and staff in our schools. So while the comments around pay, teacher pay were the largest parts, we had other themes around the need for additional staff. Smaller amount of comments referenced the multilingual learning. And we also had folks who were agreeing on the need to focus on middle schools with a few comments about strategic equity projects. Most of those were about like, what are these? Tell me more. Other things that we heard from were suggestions about how we can message referendum. And then for those who are not in support of the referendum, suggestions on maybe find some other places to find your funding within our budget already. Most of that was related to the fatigue that we assumed with referendum work. Move to the next slide. So, okay, so we talked about the WEC, think tank. It is late. I've been up 16 interviews today for potential principals, so I'm tired here. All right, so we talked about the WEC report with our community leaders in think tank. We've talked about our survey. Now we're going to talk about our community engagement sessions. So recall, slides before, we had a boatload of them. They happened in February and March. We had sessions that were in English, in Spanish, in Hmong, and we had virtual sessions. So across all of those, we had 84 participants. The mode of most of these community engagement sessions was again a presentation, budget, potential referendum, teaching and learning priorities, and then we opened to a small group conversation that was facilitated and note taken by members of our SLT from central office. From the notes that they took, we brought those in and you're going to see that information in a minute. We also gave our folks who are at these engagement sessions an ability to work on the survey. So you might have also seen some of those responses in the stuff we just talked about. All right, if we can go to the next slide. So some themes that came up, and these were fairly straightforward. Again, hats off to the best team for bringing all this data to us. Around teaching and learning, most of our things revolved around staffing, class size, and literacy, and also a DLI. Within the district, we talked about budgeting. We talked about staffing, different types around academic needs, varied options or opinions on the question for the support for 2020. And facilities, again, we wanted to start address the needs in our buildings, prioritize the upgrades that are needed by equity and critical needs for staffing. Many of the same themes that we saw in the survey. The conversations that were had in these small groups were much more varied. So these were kind of like the best we could get from the themes that we saw. When they were talking, what was that? Okay. When they were talking about facilities, I do want to emphasize that there was some folks that were also talking about HVAC, accessibility, sustainability, and renewable energy too. but staffing consistently was a topic. That takes us through, pause there because that takes us through all of the community input. Bob, did I keep us at 20 minutes?
Did excellent.
All right, and then, Chair, I'll
Yeah.
give it back to you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any questions? Board Member Nichols.
Good question. Thank you, Chad. For the community input sessions, do you all recall like what the breakdown of attendees was, like employees versus kind of parents with students at those schools, or?
It varied by each session.
Okay.
We did not track who was there in terms of names and stuff. I can tell you that I saw some schools had more staff there.
Okay.
We had one gentleman almost every session repeatedly. Who was a community member. We had a few parents. There were more parents that seemed to show up in elementary locations.
Okay.
The virtual session, I can't tell you who was all involved, though. I will say we had a much lower showing on the virtual than what we anticipated, because that was a registration event, which was interesting.
The Black Hawk ones clearly are parents, community than staff.
Okay.
See what happens.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, thank you for that. I just want to make sure I'm right, because I was at one of these sessions and I recall how Cindy Green and then you, Bob, kind of presented. And what I remember about the teaching and learning piece was that there was, you know, kind of as you mentioned, Jen, like explicit conversations about student mental health, investing in, you know, teacher well-being, 4K. So, and there were some other things that I remember, you know, Cindy also put in there, kind of our career and technical opportunities and pathways for students and being able to expand those opportunities. So if people were hearing that, and then so I'm understanding that they're hearing that presentation and the themes that are still coming out under teaching and learning in the input sessions are like reduced class size. I don't mean like, you know what I mean, like, and staffing. And then maybe the literacy and the DLI came up, or is that, am I hearing that right?
Yeah.
And for the people that took the survey, they didn't necessarily hear any of the presentation. Or did they?
I'm sorry, I did mention that. Some of
Okay.
us who did the survey, we also linked to the presentation. So we had taped a separate presentation of Cindy and Bob, that was a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
A little tiny bit shorter, that was given with the survey link too, so they had that information as well. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that.
Oh, that's okay, that's okay, okay. So, and then around the facility piece. I see like HVAC and like these other critical needs coming up. Do you have a sense, and you may not, but do you have a sense of people were talking about HVAC and other critical improvements as like?
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning.
Oh, they were talking about air conditioning.
By schools that do not have control of air, like so many, like that's the
Came up a
biggest thing
lot.
they're talking about, like summer months are coming, climate control is real, these buildings are really high. We need air.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, yeah, I was wondering if maybe it was going towards sustainability, but I hear it, it's like cool the buildings down.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I mean, I was one of the facilitators of one of these groups.
Mhm.
And they were smaller groups in some cases, so sometimes we had 3 people, sometimes we had 5. And what I was noticing, because I had a smaller group, sometimes the topics got really taken by one person in that group. And then you got to bring them back when there were other 5 people, so that's the varied part. I
Yeah.
thought that you would.
Oh,
Agree.
design be prompt, and you can see how discussions went in just completely different directions. Which is nice then to triangulate it against that survey and those open-ended comments where it's much more constrained. So you can kind of see But it's incredibly varied and you can see it in the notes that folks had. There's a lot of stuff.
Okay, great, thank you.
Board Member Moser Feltham.
I'm good. I found it in the report in the weekly update.
Board Member Simpson.
You, Beth, I think this question is for you. I'm looking at the number of respondents that work at MMSD. And then the next slide with the support numbers for both of the potential referendum. And I'm wondering, did you or could you also run these numbers if we take out staff?
We did not initially. I would think we could. I can talk with Bree, who ran our awesome research director, but I can't see the reason why we probably cannot. I mean, there's a lot of crossover in these groups, so we'd have to take it with caution, but we certainly could slice. And we've talked about that a little bit in our discussions about taking a look.
Okay.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, the numbers, you know, are obviously gonna be skewed because of that high percentage. So I would really love to see them in that form as well. Is there any way, there's so many people who responded who are directly connected with MMSD in some way. And it looks like very few that are not, that represent, you know, just like the general person in the public that's going to be voting, but who doesn't have a child in the system, who isn't coming to these meetings, who doesn't have any vested interest necessarily other than to do good for the community by supporting the school. Is there a way that we can move forward trying to target that group, which is the majority of our population?
Can I address some of that? So I do know that the Madison Public School Foundation has been working on polling.
Okay.
So and in that polling, they would have samples that would help to get at that. That polling was in the field already and is being analyzed now. So it's not done by us, it's over at the foundation. So I'm not sure on the estimated date.
The other thing that's just seems to be a change. So for instance, I was involved in the previous superintendent search. We did these in-person sessions. We had huge turnout of both staff and community. When we did all of the focus groups for the previous referendum, again, we had huge turnout. And now here in 2024, I was surprised at the, like when we did the public meetings for the job profile, we didn't get a lot of people for that. And that was surprising. And same with some of our referendum meetings. So it just feels like it's a different time. And I was especially surprised when we did the virtual session because I thought, oh, that would be really well attended. And it didn't get what we thought. So I'm perplexed as to, you know, how to continue to get that, like you say, it's critical. What is it? A small percentage, 20% or something that have taxpayers that have kids in the schools, something around there. I'm perplexed as how do we tap that?
Right, yeah, I mean, that's really clear in here, and when you're looking at so few people showing up for those in person, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Does anybody, like, I'm really asking that, what does that mean? That we had so few people show up to have these conversations?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my understanding is if you go back to the referendum before the pandemic, board members actually were able to engage voters very differently than the administration is allowed to, in part because we are elected officials. And so if you go, the reason we didn't do this in 2020 is obviously because it would be very uncomfortable during the pandemic and lockdown and virtual learning to go door to door. But if you go to the referendum before that, the board members divided the district into our 4 high school units and actually did the canvassing effort for the district as part of this approach. And so I think when you're talking about engaging voters, there are real constraints for the administration that function specifically are very differently for board members themselves. I do think that we may need to engage in that conversation as a board.
The other thing that pops to mind is when I think it was when Alma was first starting with the superintendent. They indicated that many community members had like input fatigue. Like we keep telling you, we're sick of telling you. I think that's an undercurrent.
You good?
Yeah, that was pretty much the point I would make. But
There's a question on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, is that it for feedback? Okay, all right, moving on to the sustainability resolution. Oh, sorry, okay.
Part of the long city's plan.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so you don't get rid of that easy. That's still
got
there. So we can go to the next slide. So just two quick updates for us. So a reminder of our timeline. So today, well, upcoming board meeting, we're gonna be considering the sustainability resolution. We have on May 6th, a special board meeting where we're gonna dive into that, the long range facility plan in depth. We've already got our discussion on community feedback that you just heard. And we're gonna be leading into the discussion of the zero greenhouse gas emissions. We go to the next slide, you'll see our timeline. It's not new to you. We are in the midst of presenting that long range facility plan to go to eventually when the board decides if you're gonna go for referendum or not. We are looking at doing that now in June, so that is a change. The last possible date for us to do that is August. And then November would be on the ballot if we choose to have a referendum question or questions. Next slide.
Right, so these are some of the repeats that we had, but I wanted to keep the links to one. It's the most recent design engineering presentation that we talked about at the last operations work group. We're not gonna go into the details tonight, or the salary. And then just the other information that we provided at the time regarding the United Nations sustainability timeline. That 2050 is a kind of theme, not only for local utilities, but kind of the standard in terms of zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And so I want to kind of get into the context of what we're talking about. The West High School Green Club talking about, which I thought they did another excellent job. Thank your thoughts. So right now, the first one is the current sustainability resolution, 2040 completion, renewable energy. I think there's a general consensus, my opinion, of moving that to zero greenhouse gas emissions. And so what I really want to talk about is, it's really what I think, not that it's not important, but based on what I know today, even though 2040 is a long ways away, kind of the mapping out of what needs to happen for us to be able to meet that 2040 time. If you recall, talks about us basically clearing out 3 schools starting in 2026, 27, renovating and or building new at those locations, right? It's not that that's not doable, but it's a tall task given our current financing, given what I believe the private sector construction market can manage. Saying that, 2040 is a long ways away from 2024, so I think you really have 2 choices: at zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, which maintains 50% reduction by 2030, 75% by 2035, and then 100% by 2040, which is the same timelines as the sustainability measures, just we would be measured zero gas emission. And then the other one is moving to 2050 zero greenhouse gas emissions, which pushes off the 50% target by to 2035, goes 80% by 2045, and then 100% by 2050. It's a possibility that we could achieve that goal before that 2050. But again, at this point in time, we have demonstrated with the facility condition report, the work on the long-range facilities plan, and our public input, not only the private sector, but our own staff, that we have significant facility needs. And so I really believe, regardless of where we land as the board on sustainability or zero greenhouse gas emissions, we need to attend to our facilities, and we're gonna have to move forward with a referendum question on facilities, I believe, to even be able to hit the 2040 or the 2050, right? It's not like we can not work on facilities if we can't come to, or you decide to maintain the current resolution, which I don't recommend, but changing it at least to zero greenhouse gas emissions. I think it's important. I have to say the recommendation of the staff is 2050 zero greenhouse gas emissions, only because of the implements on the ability to implement and the costs associated with doing it by 2040. Not that it can't be done if we go with it. It's just the conservative looking at implementation costs and what it can support, and I think the operational revenues. I just think 2050 is the recommendation, which is why we, the staff, are recommending zero greenhouse gas emissions by 20. So the next slide is really the discussion that we talked about, just that. And my timeline, I would like us, if you're interested in changing that resolution, to do it next week at the board meeting, because it's a big piece of our law facility sustainability. Whether it's the last long range facilities plan, it is this one, because it's questions. Just so you want to go back one slide, just so you can see the, yeah. Thank you.
Board member questions? Board member Nichols?
Yes, well, this isn't so much a question, but given the proposal to have this discussion ready for a potential vote in a week, I guess I'd be more interested in kind of knowing if we have enough kind of alignment around what the language or the revisions would be that would set us up to take that vote next week. So I think I've been consistent, and I'll just repeat what I've said. I have been in favor of us moving to a zero greenhouse gas emissions kind of metric. The last time we talked about it, I think there were a number of us that were interested in keeping the 2040 goal. And I just want to bring back that the 2040 goal is like closing 3 schools a year. And what all that comes with. So the way I understood it was that we would, if we were gonna go with the 2040, there was a set of schools every year starting, I think, in 2026. That would go all the way up to like 2039, but it would consistently be like the 3 schools a year. Which could create quite a bit of hardship for families. You know, I mean, in my opinion, like a lot of disruption kind of in our system. And then if we went with goal 3, which is kind of expanding it out, it's still keeping zero greenhouse gas emissions, expanding that horizon out to 2050. Then we're looking at 2 schools a year, right? That's the way I remember it. 2 schools a year, I think also, would we be starting in 2026 though?
Yeah, and Yes.
Cause it's kind of, you're like taking a fewer number of schools and kind of spreading it out, I think, over a longer time. The way I remember the conversation was, there could be some technology and other kind of accelerations that happen that could still get us to complete the goal before 2050. It's just that right now, we don't necessarily, you know what I mean, we can't say that for certain, right? Okay. And then there was also the overall kind of price tag. Price tag seems like the wrong word to use, but the overall investment is a better way to describe it, around what would also come into each referendum to kind of support just the sustainability investments.
Right.
But the sustainability investments can't be separated from the other facility improvements, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, I think for me, it's like I really want to stick with 2040, but I don't know if the impact of closing 3 schools a year is something that we have enough insights on, like the impact on students and families. And it still makes me a little nervous to think about 3 schools a year. Every year.
Yeah.
For an extended amount of time. And so I think because of that, I think even 2 schools is a lot, to be honest with you, but I don't know, I think maybe because of that, I'm leaning more towards the 2050. Just because it feels like maybe it would help us kind of spread out the closures, and still get us moving towards the goal. I don't know if that seems very thorough, but that's where I'm leaning. Oh, I'm not the chair. Sorry.
Thank you. I think for me, when I think about a 16-year plan, I think that 16-year plan is gonna take 25 years. I think that it's hard for me to imagine that we can see the future enough to make a plan that long. And as a result, and because of that, I wanna stick with the 2040, right? And it's a resolution of our intention, and we have a plan based on it. That we will seek to meet. And I'm not afraid that, like, oh no, what if we can't? Like, if we find out 6 years into a 16-year plan that it's gonna take longer, like that to me feels okay. But what I don't wanna do is say, oh, we're gonna have a plan for 2050 that's actually gonna be 2060. Or a plan that 2060 is gonna be 2070. Because the urgency there. So that's where I'm at with that. I could imagine at least one of my board colleagues saying, well, then it's why have a resolution for empty things? But I don't think it's empty. And I think that we can bring the community along on the goal. And I think that we should, and I think that we should seek to lead to whatever extent we can. So that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, I think I'd lean scenario 2, 0 greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. I think this is a sobering thing that we are dealing with limited resources and limitations within our legal confines as the school district for this enormous undertaking. But yeah, I still lean being more aggressive with this resolution, this goal. I think ultimately it is non-binding. I think the shutting down 3 schools per year is daunting. And it looks very vague right now. But I still think we should try and scope out what that image looks like in order to accomplish it. And we have time to do that. When those 3 or 4 years down the line, we have time to scope out, see what that looks like, and ultimately, if we think it's feasible 3 or 4 years down the line, because we've done the work, let's do it, but if not, that's a sobering moment. But it would be my preference to stay more aggressive on the timeline. And at least try to sketch that out, what it looks like. Yeah, and but one thing that I am interested in making sure we put in this resolution or in policy are like binding things. So like when we buy new equipment, we can't buy gas boilers anymore. When the opportunity comes across, we have to maximize solar, things like that. So I am interested in like putting binding things in the policy. So when schools do make upgrades, you know, yeah.
So when I am having a lot of difficulty responding to how I would want to change or not change this resolution, because it feels like I want to look at it from a different angle. When I'm thinking about the speed at which we're doing this incredibly important work, I'm thinking about that we don't have the money to do this. We have to ask the community to support whatever we're doing. And so I want to know what the community is interested in supporting so that we can reverse engineer the map of how, of how long it's going to take to get there. I don't know that for me, it makes any sense to go ahead and arbitrarily decide one or the other without having like more knowledge about the appetite of our community to put a certain amount of investment into this work. And to me, that's the speed at which we can go. And so I'm still looking for, if we can come up with the data on the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act and maximizing that and how that weaves into the cost of this work. I feel like that's incredibly important information to have because that may drive a greater urgency among our community to take advantage of moving quicker while that's still available. I'm also really interested in knowing what are the estimates for saving in, utilities costs and other expenses as this work happens so that we can see how it starts to balance a little bit more. And so, with those two numbers, I feel like it's easier to go to the community. And I guess I don't know what kind of polling, if the polling that's out there now has actual numbers in it to say, would you support this amount or would you support this amount? But that's what I want to see in order to not be arbitrarily choosing a goal.
Maya?
Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, thank you. So, as I think about this, I think about it in similarly like how Blair mentioned, like if we choose something a little closer, and we might end up going further out. Also, my thoughts are also like closing many schools off the bat. I'm not really in favor of that. However, I do understand, like, even with our referendum, and thank you, Laura, for bringing that up, we're looking to, update some of our schools. So that may be the reality of it already. And so it's like, how do we make those connections to this? Thank you, Savian, for also mentioning just about the, about like our future purchases and what that looks like, because I was actually going to say that, was that, if we're moving forward, I would like to see something that kind of stops us from buying things now. If we can kind of move in that direction and buying the things so that we're not replacing them to meet this goal in like a couple years. And so I think we can definitely make sure that the savings are happening there. I'm in favor of the second option. And I think what ends up happening is that I think in like 10 years, there may be a board and we might not be close to that. And I think things are always going to be changing. But I think if we kind of stay steadfast and we kind of make the impacts now, I think it kind of sets the tone of how things will move in the future. So those are my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, you feel like you got what you need for next week?
I mean, I do have two draft resolutions, zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, by 2050, in the same format as the existing resolution, changing the word timelines. Yeah, right now, but the additional, that's big. Like talked about the points.
Like adding
Yeah.
additional kind of binding
Components.
things.
Yeah. What would be, if board members want us to consider additional changes, what would be, the deadline to get that suggestion to you for us to consider on Monday?
I would say if you want to do more than the template you're talking about doing, I don't think next week is feasible. So I think we're talking about, which is fine. I think then we're talking about, if you want to deal with this, it's the May board education, that kind of week, right? But I don't know if we can pull it off. I'd say no. I don't want to be able to try to do it. Big my topics. TJ, you want to crank it off?
Board Member Nichols.
Well, I was just gonna say, in the original 2019 resolution, there is quite a bit of language in there about, whereas increased energy efficiency in district buildings and the increased use of renewable energy sources such as solar and wind will not only increase the environmental sustainability, but could be economically beneficial. There is some whereas language, but I don't think it's what you're talking about, Savion, necessarily, unless the resolution starts to have language like whereas future purchases are made with do you know what I mean? Like, because it's not really a policy. It's like, it's written in a resolution style language, like, be it further resolved, be it further resolved. So I wasn't sure if you were thinking that there's like a completely different format for the resolution or for.
And the more I think about it, maybe it's something for the purchasing policy or bid policy or procurement policy. But no, I was suggesting that, our sustainability efforts aren't concentrated in this one resolution. So I was just recommending that we also consider those things elsewhere where they're relevant.
Okay.
Be like in a master facility.
Yeah.
As it gets developed, then that would be something that the board accepts.
Okay.
Even the long range facilities plan might be that, because you're right, this can't house all of those. Right, this is sort of the long-term vision, the resolution, but all of those other details could live in other places.
And there is a big section in the long range facilities plan about sustainability that might get at some of those pieces that you're thinking about.
Okay.
So I guess my question is process, like. If there's, I mean. are we actually getting an updated resolution?
You would.
That has it has updated language and some of the things that were in the original language that have been done so far might be updated or I guess, yeah, and we're gonna see that for the first time next week.
Yeah, I did some draft work on creating 2 draft resolutions, preparing this, but I've been here. That is exactly the renewable energy 2019 resolution, but 0 greenhouse gas emissions, 1 to 2040 was very similar, whereas the further resolve, just updating that language.
So it's the same language as what's here. It's
Yes.
either with
It's the
2040 greenhouse gas emissions, 2050 greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
Or leave it the same.
Yes. We could have both of those drafts available for you to have at Board of Education to move one.
Right.
And I would say, having spent quite a bit of time looking at what we've done to date on current sustainability, and taking a look at some of the next facilities that we consider some staff as priority middle school and elementary schools. A lot of this comes into play in, do we have the space available to put a geothermal system, right? Some sites we do, some sites we do not. Because of the acreage that's owned and the capacity of each one of those sites. And it becomes very site specific and building specific, which we're at a point on the facilities, we know we need to move forward, but we don't have all the details worked out because we don't have the money to pay for the in-depth architectural analysis, which is, really need to have that referendum passed to be able to do that kind of significant investment on the front end. We can build that into 2020. We're gonna build that in forward to that. But I think those kind of conversations have to happen kind of as we're moving forward, right? And it's really part of a larger multi-board meeting, getting community involvement, each one of the school communities, starting next winter and spring, kind of site by site, right? Sherman Shabazz. Should we build new or should we renovate? And this is a site that has the green space to put in geothermal, and that costs X, Y, and Z kind of thing, so. And these conversations were happening all the time, right? Just like the comprehensive high schools. Did not have the funds to put in full geothermal and go completely sustainable, but did the infrastructure on the hard work and the HVAC and the mechanicals that we could flip out the gas to electric boilers or some other system, right? That infrastructure investment has been made, but didn't have the funds to go all the way at this point in time, right? So those are like minimal things you can do moving forward to allow you to reach their goals.
Can I just ask one clarifying question, Chair?
Yeah.
Okay, so if there is a stronger alignment around 2040, going with 0 greenhouse gas emissions, the one thing I'm noticing right now, and it's 2024, clearly, the way this resolution is written, it has us being at 50% reduction by 2030. Which is 6 years out and probably less than that. And I thought in one of our earlier presentations, we had said we were like currently at like 8% renewable energy. So help me understand how we would get from 8% current renewable energy in the district to 50 in like 5.5 years. And maybe I'm just being too literal, but I think for me, like I feel like if we're gonna take the time to update the resolution, I would hope it would be something that like really in good faith effort and like with really good intentional strategy that I think we can, kind of move more boldly in that direction. And so, I guess I'm just wondering, like, would we keep the goals, those percentages exactly as they are, even though originally when it was written that was in 2019, but now we're at 2024 and now we're having to update. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, is it going to 2045 maybe? You know, I mean, to make it balance out, I don't know, I might be overthinking it again, but
No,
I'm-
those are good questions, and I'll add them. The sustainability resolution impacts two things, right? To keep that 2040 timeline requires us to start investing significantly quicker on facilities itself, but it also, if you recall, Mike's presentation and PRA's work on it, requires us to purchase additional renewable energy from utilities today to meet that
yeah.
50% by, so that impacts the operation dollars, right? So what exactly is that cost? It's not going to be incorporated in the 24-25 budget, but in the sustain, it becomes a 25-26 budget conversation about, okay, we're gonna have to start producing credit that's in the private market today to meet this 2040, or we don't have to do that, and we're not that component, right? So 2040 is, like I said, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult, but it'll have an operation back in 25-26. We will have to purchase credits from the private market.
Okay. So did you say you were bringing this next week, or?
I can,
Cause I think,
well, I will work closely with Monica to make this a priority for her to go through the resolution, but I've worked with building services, we've done some drafts, we've been going back and forth with each other to prep for 2 resolutions that have the same format of renewable energy, the existing resolution, but only updated with what needs to be through greenhouse gas emissions 2040. We can do that.
Yep.
Bob, did I hear you say purchasing Rex in 2025?
It would require us to begin purchasing RECs to hit that 50% reduction by 2030, but that is not being contemplated 24-25. We're not gonna begin. We have not costed that out, not have that in any of my scenarios to keep us on any other areas where we need to get additional revenues. That's not one of them right now,
Right.
but it would be at 25-26. We'd have to start doing that at 25-26. We'd have to work with consultants to really map that out. Cost in years.
Not that I'm an expert, but when I look at the document that the engineers sent, where they laid out the scenarios, it said in there, will require purchasing Rex for some electricity starting in 2035.
that was that one scenario that we didn't want.
Oh, that was.
The reducing the emissions one.
This was 0, yeah. 0, and
There's a lot of lead time, wasn't there? I think there was a lot of lead time in that one. There was a lot of, is that the one where there wasn't much work up front?
no, this was scenario 2,
Yeah, scenario
Oh,
2 does
okay.
require purchasing.
but it says 2035, not 2025. And to me, the reason I'm thinking about that is like 2035 is way farther away than 2025.
Yeah, and so, good point. But if you're on that side, go up to the first bullet point where it talks about investing in 9 non-referendum buildings to electrify the whole infrastructure that are all
Okay.
natural gas, which is again, significant investment, but a different area, generally done on the opposite maintenance side, the referendum.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
A lot of moving parts.
Mhm.
Takes a lot more work,
Mhm.
which is why the staff's recommending the 2050. Seems more doable to me.
Do I hear consensus around the greenhouse gas emission piece?
Yeah, well, you already know.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for anyone, but that's where I'm at as well. But yeah,
So the question that people are still thinking about is 2040 versus 2050. I'm just thinking about what the staff needs to prepare.
Right.
I think there could be that more information and more time to fully digest
Yeah,
some,
definitely.
at least a cost estimate of the recs needed for
Mhm.
that year, cost estimate. I don't know if we'll have this, but Bob, you mentioned, you know, needing more information from on specific school buildings from architects. Things like that, and I think to board member Simpkins' point, more work and information needed from the community on, you know, willingness to close a school or willingness to just build a new school versus renovate a school, I think is a serious thing. I think it's a thing that we really have to consider for some of these schools. And there's just a lot of legwork we need to do to engage the community in that question.
So can I just, it seems like there's a period of time between what you were initially proposing, that we changed the resolution on April 15th. And then the board is having a special meeting and open workshop on May 6th to get the long-range facility plan. And you, Bob, have been tying our decision around this goal helps inform what you all scope out in the long-range facility plan.
Yes, the sustainability piece is a huge part of the long-range facilities plan. So right now, we have to write it to the 2019 resolution. That's a difficult one to write to because it's not doable. I can't.
I'm wondering, would it help to go to the timeline slide just to see that real quick?
Well, I mean, I only brought that up, and yes, you can go to the timeline. I think what I'm just noticing is that we've had like 3 or 4 conversations about sustainability resolution. And, you know, I think whether it's next week or the week after or whatever, what I've heard from the staff very clearly is that they need direction from us on the sustainability goal in order to write the rest of the long-range facility plan. And that moves us through our, you know, our process, future, you know, potential referenda question and amounts. So we have to be able to, we may not have all the details. It sounds like there's a lot of things that we don't know yet, but we do actually, we've been given quite a bit of information. And I think that we're not gonna be able to keep delaying. Like, I think we have to give it our best intention. And you know, I don't know, I mean, maybe as we get more details, there's something that we could come back and, you know, modify at a later time, but I don't know, it seems like we're starting to get into the time sensitiveness of needing to be able to like say 40, 50.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing you all say.
And just to put up there, just for date references. So May 6th is when we had that long-range facility plan special meeting. And then May operation work group meeting isn't until May 13th. So it's after the special meeting for the long-range facility plan, which means that we have today, and then we have the regular board meeting in April, and then the next thing is the long-range facility plan that we have. So just in timeline order.
Yeah.
Yeah, and remember, the next step, which is what I'm trying to build up to, is we know we need to do facility work. The facility plan helps us inform the structuring of potential referendum question on facility. Also an ops question, so it's twofold. The long-range facilities plan before we can really have a good informed decision on preliminary budget vote in June and also potential referendum questions. So that's our building.
With August being the last possible date for us to think about those, and I don't believe we have July 14th.
Right, so this is a vision that would guide those other pieces
Yes.
of implementation.
Yes.
We need to make a decision next week, Monday then.
So we will prepare two resolutions, zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The same format as existing resolution.
Yeah, we know the board has made a commitment to sustainability, right, with the current
Yeah.
resolution, and will continue to make this.
Yeah.
Moving forward, so we know that. And so whichever way the resolution ends up going will help us to inform, as Bob said, long-range facilities plan, eventually a master facilities plan, and I'm just to hear Dr. Gothard talk about that. In his experience, he has gone through the writing of that, which will then get into, do you renovate, do you build new? Because those costs are pretty different, we're finding out. Like substantially different. We won't be able to know, is it better to renovate or build new by next week or by the week after? Like that's what comes in this master facilities plan that comes out, and right, it's probably what we want to talk to our community about too, and get this whole nother phase of community feedback around. So what I see in here is, right, we all accept a great responsibility around this resolution. So you know, you have the commitment, it's there around sustainability in whatever direction you choose. When we draft both of them will be the way that we start our move forward with the plan. That will be the direction we'll have.
Thank you.
Right, and then the last piece of the long-range facilities plan is part of. I prefer a May vote, we can do it in June, but I prefer May vote is, I would like the board and recommend the board create, Fund 46, a long-term capital improvement fund. One of the statutory requirements is, a 10-year capital improvement plan that I would use a facility condition report from last fall, plus working along with the facility plan to identify out a 10-year plan that would be consistent with those documents that I work with. It's a resolution that's going to be required. It's another tool we'll have over multiple years to fund and pay for the facility. All good stuff.
Wait, you said in May, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. That went a little longer than 15 minutes, but not bad. Thank you very much. I was a little nervous about this one, I gotta tell you. Okay. All right, we're gonna keep this focused and keep this moving. So, we continue to make modifications in terms of the 24-25 budget timeline. We laid out the timeline, so I'm not gonna reiterate that, but we're on target to talk a little bit about tonight, some proposed numbers for Fund 10, 24-25, based on decisions where the board is at and what we've been talking about. Got some numbers for you there. And then we're gonna move towards a full preliminary proposal budget for the May operations work group. And then that'll obviously then inform the June work group and then the final vote on 24-25 preliminary budget at the end of June. So that's what we're working towards. And then as part of this, we're gonna reiterate this question of a false narrative that the Republican legislature likes us to be put into as elected school board members and district staff about it's all about costs when it's not. It's really about revenues and the defunding of public education. So we're going to continue to not leave that to talk about it's really an issue of revenues, identifying revenue sources to meet what I think is a very reasonable, rational expenditure plan to have. And Jennifer's going to talk about our health and dental insurance update, the final numbers, and then I'll take that into the budget conversation of the 24-25 proposed budget expenditures that we have. I want to spend just a little bit of time on the 24-25 budget guiding principles in terms of what we have been doing from 23-24 today and looking at 24-25. We have been allocating our resources to match our strategic framework goals. We have been focusing on early literacy, class sizes, being at a level where close the opportunity gaps that exist for our scholars today. We continue to focus on a multi-year long range perspective, not only on our revenue sources, but how we're making these strategic investments on facilities and operations. And we continue to look at ways to maximize the revenues that we have, and then build on the practices that are shown, some promise. Those would be, work in mental health and social emotional learning. Also, schools, village builders, and student engagement specialists, all of which, the board has already indicated we are going to expand and maintain in 2024. So, the slide on revenue limits, is just a reiteration of what we saw before, but it's worth repeating. We are in a point of stagnating revenues that do not keep track with, minimal ongoing expenditures. We are at the end of, referendum approval of $10 million that the voters approved for us. That resulted in $21 million funding gap this year, the year we're in 23-24. When I straight line out revenues, revenue limits, assuming we have no change in our enrollments from this year to next, we're gonna be short another $9 million. So $21 million this year, another $9 million next year if our enrollment stays stable. Which is by design, and which is what we're talking about in terms of this is really a revenue problem, not an expenditure. Okay. This is coupled with the fact that we've been dealing with this issue, as a district and a board the last couple of years, 23-24. We budgeted using $12.4 million this year to keep us, to be able to afford the budgeted expenditure level, because our revenue was not there, coupled with the ESSER funds, expiring at the end of this year. We talked quite a bit about the revenue limit projections, and where we are at, in terms of the stabilizing out, which is a good thing. And I want to reiterate that without that $10 million that the voters approved in 23-24, we'd have actually had a $750,000 decrease in our ongoing revenue, right? So without voter support, we'd have had less revenues to operate this year than we had last year, right? So really significantly important that the voters have continued to support the operations, and really, I view that as understanding the revenue picture, that the Republican legislature has put public school districts, including ours, in. Okay, so that's kind of the wrap up. Now, I want Jennifer to be able to talk about, our final information on history of our health insurance and where we're going, and then I'll close out with kind of look at the expenditures, the proposal that we are.
Sure. The next slide is a history of our health insurance and where we've been since 2019 and the percentage increases to our health premiums. They've been in the single digits until last year with the courts, the change to courts. And then this year, because of our medical loss ratios and some other factors, including the effects of delayed health from COVID, have impacted the market. And we saw double-digit increases for both courts and Dean. The next slide shows our current state. This is the enrollment. We have 4,034 total. I don't know if that was my most recent number. But we have 1,439 people in a single plan. We have 2,432 in family plans, and you can see the split between Dean and courts. Courts has 72% of our employees. The next slide is our insurance carriers want us to be at about 90 cents per dollar in claims versus 10 cents in administrative costs. We're at $1. It's really $1.03 for courts and $1.35 for Dean as far as our expenditures on that. And the fact that we have not done any plan design changes over the last 4 years has sort of not given us any leverage when we're negotiating these premium increases. So that plan design changes mean higher deductibles, different tiers on the pharmacy benefit, higher different co-pays if you see a specialist, co-pays versus whether you see a general practitioner. There's a lot of different levers that we could use to mitigate as we go into next year, as we think about the premium increases for next year. And then the next slide is the breakdown of the cost. The court's cost is $7.9 million increase to the budget. The dean cost is $3.8 million for a total of $11.7 million. The total cost that the total dollar amount that we spend on health insurance is $75.9 million. And we are committed to not making any plan design changes for this year. And the last slide on insurance is the dental insurance renewal. MMSD budgets approximately $4.0 million for dental coverage. We're not making any plan design changes for 2024, 2025. We haven't had any plan increases since 2020. For this year, we need to implement a rate increase, and after we have done the analysis, they came in at 8.3% increase as a recommended. We looked at because we're self-funded, we have a balance, and we can eat into that balance a little bit so that we don't have to pass along that premium increase to staff. We can have it be lower than what they recommended to us.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Pause for any questions on health insurance? Or we want to keep rolling?
Let's keep rolling.
Okay, so I want to remind us what our task is for 24-25 budget development, and got a couple more pieces. Jennifer just shared the summary on our health insurance, so we've got a clear picture of what that increase is going to be. But our option one would be what I consider the budget that we meet the needs of our scholars, families, and staff. I call option one, which we clearly do not have sufficient ongoing revenues to fund. And then option two would be something that be a budget that's not going to meet the needs of our scholars and families, but it's going to be a budget that we can live within the revenue limits and one-time revenues for 1 year. Okay. So, thought about how to talk about the next 3 slides, which are new. I think I'm just going to take them in order. So, I want to jump to the bottom, but we're not going to jump to the bottom. So these are 24-25 proposed expenditures that we're looking at right now to date, which is in essence 23-24 moving forward, removing a large hunk of the ESSER dollars, incorporating the health insurance increases, incorporating the amounts to move them 111 positions from ESSER to local funds, and also includes the just under $13 million, the equity projects we talked about last operations for the budget. So I have incorporated those big new areas to build on last year's budget. So our largest budget, no surprise to you all, is in instruction support. And so the slide, if we go back now, thank you, Jesse, to instruction support in terms of the comparison, I'll take you to the bottom. Our proposed budget is $221.2 million compared to a budgeted level of 201, which is a $20.1 million increase, or about 10%. I'll tell you right now, because the health insurance costs came late and I'm trying to assign those to every employee within their fund source, this instruction total is going to be a little bit higher because I put the entire cost of our health and dental all in Fund 10 under instruction, because that's primarily where the costs reside. But as I develop my staff over the next month, we'll start allocating those out to the different fund sources and the different instructional components. That's a caveat. These are proposed and I'll tell you, they're gonna change. They'll change next week when I update some more numbers as we go through this, to reflect it. But this is a really good point in terms of proposed expenditures to our largest fund, which is our Fund 10. So the next, and I should have to say, these categories are what state law requires us to do in terms of putting forth a budget, in terms of adopting the budget in June. So I'm gonna start updating these between now and when you vote in June to support that preliminary budget. You'll have the whole look by fund. We're just focusing on Fund 10. So the next slide that Jesse is support. This includes pupil services, instructional services, both district administration, principal administration, facilities. Those kind of expenditures. You can see at the bottom that we're proposing right now, 182.7 million, which is a $13.1 million reduction, or about 7%. I can tell you the two main reasons that's happening is the removal of the ESSER funds that were focused a lot on services, and the winding down of our facilities renovation that runs through our budget, right? So those, we expected those to be dropping, and they are dropping. So because as the 20 facility projects are coming to a close, we're not spending that money anymore because the work is being completed. But it's a significant reduction. And then the next stage, it's the small part about the non-program expenditures. The first one, the operating transfers, that's what we're expecting to be slightly less than the $66.3 million budgeted this year at 65.5. That's really not really, that is the subsidy of Fund 10 to cover the cost of implementing the special education services, the IEPs, the students that require them. So that's what we're expecting to have to fund out of Fund 10 for 24-25, because the state and federal government do not give us sufficient dollars to cover those state and federal requirements in terms of IEP. So we provide those services clearly, but then have to fund those with revenues from the general fund. Overall, which drives home the point that I've been talking about, our proposed expenditures are only going up 1.5% this year compared to last year. Remember what I've been talking about the last several months, that this is a revenue problem, and it's a false story to focus on the costs of school districts and public education. Again, a false story designed by the Republican legislature to underfund and not properly invest in public education, right? That's the revenue limit constraints. That's why we talk about needing to identify new sources of operating revenues to fund the school system and meet the needs of our scholars and families. Okay, so budget, the next slide. That's the expenditures. Carry the expenditures to put in context the option 1 and option 2 in terms of the first line, the 24-25 Fund 10 expenditures proposed $498.1 million for option 2. Option 1 at 518 is merely the 498.1 that's currently budgeted, with the max on the compensation estimates of both CPI and STEP of $1.3 million. And so in the end, the difference between option 1 and option 2 is a range of $37 million. That's basically what I believe we need to fund, regardless of the status of getting new revenues in the fall, up to $57.3 million, and the need to create sustainable ongoing revenues to match the needs of our families and scholars. All right, we've talked a lot about the next steps. The next slide talks about those in terms of laying out the conversations we're having now, and the work we talked about, our resolution on sustainability. In May, as Jen has said, early May, we're going to have that long range facilities plan special meeting. And we'll continue to look at the more complete picture of the proposed budget, all funds in and revenues, which will then inform the actual budget. We'll then start identifying some ranges of revenues that we're going to need. Again, the only way we get the revenue under the current system is to ask the voters to give us more revenues. And then that leads us to the June votes, hopefully on the preliminary budget for 24-25 and potential referendum questions. All right, so that gets us to the point of questions.
Okay, any questions? Folks online? Board Member Nichols. When will, when is the board expected to make a decision regarding healthcare?
Can you say more about what you mean by that?
Just like what decision?
It'll be, from my perspective, it'll be the vote on the preliminary budget in
Right.
June. The cost will be incorporated into that by employee, by fund source, by required expenditure. It'll
Okay.
include those estimates. Now, obviously, the time between now and then to talk about what Jennifer talked about, but our commitment was we weren't gonna make any health care changes from 23-24 rolling 24-25. Of course, you could offset some of those costs by doing plan changes, but we've said we are gonna entertain.
Okay, thank you.
In order to roll those out to employees, we would want to like start talking about them now for next year.
Mhm.
Because that, especially the health insurance gets taken a month in advance. So we want to know, we really want to know that by next month.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you. Board Member Mosner Feltham.
Just to be totally sure that I'm understanding. In the proposed budget with sufficient revenue, the compensation increase up to 20.3 million. That number is up to 4.12%.
Plus step,
Okay, just
which is roughly another 2% on top of that 4.12.
Yep. Great. I was just making 100% sure
Yes.
that's what we're looking at there. Then I guess the other thing that comes to mind, and it's not. I'm just thinking. For the future, not this coming budget, but like with healthcare utilization being so high, as working in schools is high stress plus germy. Like how we think about managing those costs with healthy working conditions, what that will look like long term. And that's not, I know it's not
Yep.
budget exactly, but it's what's front to mind for me.
I think we can move on to review of policy.
So this slide just references and is linked, the current policies, that we have, all the policies, Can we get those.
Yeah.
We have paper copies.
Paper copies in front of.
Pull it up. This one you want.
But you like to also have a hard.
I have another.
Josh, you want to come join us? Sure.
Josh.
Success, right?
Most awesome. Yeah. We want to start with these changes and then move to the USDA.
Yes.
All right. So we'll talk about, it would be the. No, I think we want to talk about, not the waiver first, but 6152, the student fees, fines and charges. Okay. Have that? Jesse, you got that up? Okay.
Yep.
Yes. So just so the one that says, the one we're talking about, is Neola at 6152 is our current 3017. So you should have the 3017 just so you can reference, and then the other one is where we begin to make the changes.
Okay, so these will be fairly straightforward, but we'll just walk it down in terms of, talk about the substantive changes, students, science, regardless in terms of the order. You'll see the change, the first paragraph where it's highlighted in green, where because of the current policy where any fee or rental charges that are charged to students, including the meal prices, are to be included in the June preliminary budget. So I added that to the Neola policy. That's not part of the base Neola policy. Assuming the board would want to continue to have that as part of, in terms of part of their policy. It always has been, so I assume that was the case. So that would be the first in terms of taking a look at the Neola policy. Then as you go down in terms of charges can't exceed the costs and money received from anything, not only from the schools on resale, but also the fees themselves. Budget planning and accounting is my team, DPA. It goes to them, so that's specified in the policies. The other big change was our current policy 3710 includes prorated for rentals and a whole schedule of fines that also already exist in our procedures and policies. And I went with the Neola recommendation that those really should not be laid out in policy. Those really should be the direction of the district administrator to come up with those scheduled fines. They're currently in the policy. They're also currently in our procedures that were last updated in February of 2022. So that's the other substantive change in terms of the existing policy to the Neola. That's shift over, taken care of in that written procedures by staff. It's currently in 2 places. And then as you go down in terms of the rentals, and those are already laid out in the policy in terms of the budget. And just lays down in terms of the collection, just like we do now. It's done at the school level building by the principal. And then this specifies the district administrator or her designee talks about the collection, which we're going to talk more in the USDA bad debt policy. Neola talked about the policy of taking an individual small claims court. I added the second option, and that is what we do currently, contracting with a third party, basically for debts, and the policies also are laid out in our existing procedures when that triggers. I'll say fairly liberal in not contacting a third-party debt collection on debts, which is something that we're going to talk about. Josh talks about the bad debt, he's talking about the 24 regarding the impacts of fees and collectors. Okay, well that's that. Any questions on that? Yeah.
I'm really, really uncomfortable with the idea that we could take a family to court or to collections because they can't pay for to school. can we eliminate that section if the board decides to do so?
Well, I think that opens up a bigger question. I'd say that opens up a larger conversation, which some districts have done nationwide. I don't know of any in Wisconsin, I really haven't done the research about, do we want to continue to charge fees? And there's a price tag, right? And the biggest area really to me is the food program, and stay focused on there, about $2 million. 110 to stop fees. It would be more when we take a look at all the fees that we collect in terms of the activity fees and the other fees that are there. And then we'd want to be more specific on, continue to charge students, scholars, the best placement tests, right? We cover that. We go down by each and we tally that up. I think if you're gonna have fees to collect, you gotta give administration an opportunity to collect those fees that the board said is owed to the district, right? There is, and we'll talk about the next policy, there is a policy that we use to be able to waive the fees for financial hardship for families. Should we submit the free and reduced price USDA applications, that's in addition. But principals right now have the authority in the current policy to waive for financial hardship for our current policy. And I believe they do. And then you can appeal that.
I remember doing that.
Yeah, to the district administrator if you don't like the outcome of the principal's decision. Current.
I'm aware. I think that there's a lot of families that wouldn't ask for a waiver or don't fall into that category, and we charge a lot of money for a lot of different things.
I would say that money we collect offsets our costs, so then it's a conversation. Which fees do you want to charge? And then if we're not going to, we'd have an estimate on the revenue.
Yeah, I guess for this specific conversation, I'm also not comfortable with the district having policy and referring people to a debt collection agency. I don't think that's something we should be in the business of doing. I am interested in looking at how we get to offering universal lunches. That 2 million figure. But I mean, outside of the debt collection aspect, this policy and procedure just looks way more thorough than what we have right now. But that aspect is one part that I would not be in favor of.
I too could be in favor. And we would need to then start adding a line in our budget. I'm being very intentional about that. Which is, what I hear is that if we make a values driven decision through a policy, then we just have to think about the budgetary impact. That's all. And then just be committed to that even when we're facing other constraints. I'm not saying anything that you don't already know.
When you talked about nutrition fees, can you say the number that you said again?
Yeah, we budget just under $2 million to collect in fee revenues for Fund 50, our lunch program.
Okay.
There's obviously other fees that we collect that I don't have by fee tab, I don't have the total revenues.
So we budget just under $2 million for fees that we would collect. That's like the number of how much lunch money people are paying.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm thinking of a couple of things. I'm thinking of how affordable school meals are for families who make enough money compared with what it costs in money and time resource to pack lunch, because I'm thinking about me, right? Like my family's not eligible. We can pay for it. And I love school lunch. And if we are thinking about a values driven policy that would make it universally affordable, universally accessible, regardless of ability to pay for students to have lunch in MMSD, which I like. I would also be looking for opportunities to collect fees anyway from families that, like mine, say, no, I want to pay, right? I want to be part of this, not just in when I pay my taxes, but like at that level. I think that there are many families who would benefit from universally accessible lunch regardless of ability to pay. And I think that there are many families who can pay anyway. And I wouldn't want to lose that. I'm also thinking about what Dr. Shepke said about some of the sort of like operations referendum detractors who say, what about creative ways to find new revenue? And I'm wondering, for this particular fee, where in our community we might source just under $2 million annually to make sure that all kids at our schools can eat. Those are the things I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I would add that $2 million is based on probably about a 40% participation. So if we start offering frees, that can increase your participation, let's say doubles participation.
Sure.
Then we're talking about the need for more costs.
And if,
or subsidy.
if it's okay to add a note to that point, because there are numerous case studies around the country from states that have adopted universal free meals in the wake of the pandemic waivers expiring. You can make a decision to subsidize free meals, and you need to be prepared operationally for what may happen in terms of the increased counts. So you need to, if you make that commitment to the community and say we're putting fiscal backing behind extending meals universally at no cost, you might in fact double your participation rate, and that will affect access, the timing of lunch periods. It could cascade, and states are finding this out, that they were unprepared operationally for the success program. And so it's important to consider this fact.
May I interject? I just want to make sure that we are, for this particular policy, it's not just about lunch fees. We are talking about fees across the system. We have a number of fees such as technology fees when people, devices that are not being returned, students who have a number of different devices that they do not return. We're talking about library books, we're talking about instruments, we're talking about, we're just not talking about the fees for lunch for this. We are talking about fees across the entire system. So I just want for us to remember that. The second thing I would just like to talk about is when we look at a number of the families who are have outstanding debt, a large number of those families are not families who are coming from free or reduced lunch. These are families who just don't pay. So I just want us to be mindful that we're not talking about some of our families who are experiencing hardship. We're actually probably talking about some of our families that probably already paying for it, but they just don't pay. So I just want to put that.
And so to add to that point, TJ, thank you for filling in that picture, a bit of stage setting. The district has accommodated and to some extent forgiven outstanding debts for, I'm talking about meals specifically, for a number of years. However, following the pandemic, and this is not exclusive to Madison, that debt level has exploded. It's reached historical highs 2 years ago. And this puts a substantial burden on Fund 50, the fund that I use as my source for operating costs, puts a substantial burden on Fund 50 because the fund is self-contained. It has been a practice in the past, in some cases, that Fund 10 was part of assisting Fund 50 in writing off those debts. The magnitude of those prior debts was much, much lower. And I would venture to say that it did not substantially curtail the capacity of the program to expand. Now we're looking at debts in the neighborhood of $250,000 a year. Those are serious operating costs. And the very fact that those are, as TJ said, when you look at the magnitude of that, and you look at the fact that a daily meal charge for a full pay family, those must be in substance incurred by families in the full pay category who do not meet the guidelines for federal subsidy of the full meal or part of the meal. So we need to have some kind. The decision, as Bob articulated, it is either you decide that fees are not applied, or you recognize, and the policy here before you does not prescribe that. Policy is limited. It does not prescribe those methods. But there's an important decision to make about how to keep those funds flowing into the operating capacity of food nutrition. That's work that can be discussed more and done in future. The policy simply formalizes our current practice. And I did want to point that out. The task before the board really to meet PPI's requirements of the department is simply to formalize policy. The policy that you have before you continues our current practice of continuing to feed students a USDA meal, not a different meal, not withholding food, but continues to feed students the same meal other students get regardless of negative balance. As nearly as I can tell, I'm only 2 years into the business. Nearly as I can tell, that practice took hold in 2017. It's a very important protector of student dignity and student privacy. I think it's commendable practice. And I think we should continue. Under our current circumstances, it needs to be also acknowledged that it is posing cost to Fund 50 to continue the practice. So the policy does little more than to resolve to continue and formalize, as ratified by the board, our conclusions. The methodology we choose to continue funding this work to be done.
Board Member Muldrow.
Thanks, Chair. So I guess my question around this would be, one, how do we communicate with families to pay this fee related to anything? I think we have to acknowledge, like, if your student loses their violin, that's an unanticipated cost, right? And so no matter what a family's financial reality is, the average American isn't set up to pay a $400 like emergency vehicular like change, right? So we're living in a moment of record inflation. We're seeing that strain like the average family. How are we communicating with families to pay these fees? What kind of payment plans can we arrange? And I think, kind of to Blair's point, if we have families who are saying, no, I want to participate and pay for my kids' lunch, I can contribute in that way. Do we have any vehicle for families to say, hey, donate an extra $100 at the beginning of the year to help a family that is struggling to pay for their kids' lunch?
I can just comment quickly. We do indeed. We do have a donations mechanism, and sometimes the donations are far more generous. They're in the thousands of dollars. That has also been a feature on the national scene of both private companies and individuals with the means donating large sums of money to pay off school meal debt. The answer, partial answer, I don't want to be exhaustive or tedious about it. The way we communicate is via email, via paper mail, via phone calls in some cases. It is a frequent and consistent form of communication, simply to say, at one point during the year, we tried a campaign where we said, your school meal funds are approaching the point of not having further funds. Fortunately, that proved confusing to many people. They thought we were saying they owed money, when in fact we were just saying it's a courtesy reminder.
That you're about to run out.
Yes, and we don't, and we want to avoid the email which says you're now in arrears. So many ways to try to reach out and communicate this. Some of them have been effective in slowing the growth of the debt, which poses the burden of Fund 50. Unfortunately, we are still seeing a second year of historically high debt.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just add one comment. Immediately for this coming year, I would be in favor of the district just shelling out universal free lunches. There are other aspects of the policy that we received here that I think are worth considering. And we should change, but that's just my opinion. When it comes to all fees for all extra curriculars, like, I hear the point that if we just cover it, the participation might increase. I think that's good. I think we should get more kids that participate in extracurriculars. How we fund that, I think we should reach out to partners and other folks in the city to help fund that, but I guess that's why I'm having a tough time with this conversation right now, because I think it should be a door into, you know, how we think about district provided curriculars in general.
I feel like I should clarify that I may have expressed myself unclearly. When I was talking about the stresses of increased participation, I was speaking only of meals. Now, this might apply to extracurriculars as well. I was thinking about the fact, I'm gonna call out a school that did a great job this year. Hamilton Van Hise worked tirelessly to push a lot of students into a limited number of meal periods. We all know there are a lot of competing tensions. Some schools, I think, would be very hard pressed to say, we're gonna accommodate a doubling of students who eat here in the same amount of time in the same space. We've seen other states who struggle with this. It is a good problem to have. I completely agree with that. It's a good problem to have. It's just something I know other states have said. I wasn't prepared for how much we were gonna need to increase. Might need to increase staffing, might need to increase equipment, those things.
So you need some lead time to plan for that, and
Yes.
also budgetarily, you need some time to
You need to have
invest in it.
walking in, yeah, I need to have a runway plan,
Yep.
yes, absolutely.
So can I just clarify to our board members, are you saying that as it relates to the third party? Because I understand that you don't want the third party collection as it relates to food. But in line with what TJ shared, that the collection fees relate to whether it's electronics, books, whatever. You want that language removed, period, regardless. Or separate, or are you okay with language specific to possible third-party collections with the exception of food?
Yeah, because the policy covers fees, rentals, and
Yeah, it's not just.
all three.
Whenever Montreal.
I think there's some complexity in kind of having that be our overall approach, given given the kinds of property we engage with and the implications of that. I think beyond the scope of our normalized fees, I think there's some implications around just eliminating fees or eliminating the potential to collect resources related to any gift relationship to property, that I think could land us in a curious situation outside of kind of the realm of what we're discussing right now. So I guess my question for you would be, how far would that extend in terms of our ability to, in terms of our ability to navigate responsibility towards owing the district resources?
I would say it only extends as far as we exercise it. This is an option. So there still has to be some process in terms of when we would exercise the option of collections if we decided to go that route. But there's not, this isn't, what's the word I'm looking for? This isn't anything that makes it compulsory or like required. It's an option. So I don't have a position beyond what my colleague shared in terms of the options that you can weigh. But I would just say that this, if we were to go in the direction of including the language as it relates to third-party collections, that just gives us an option to exercise that if we chose to do it.
Can I ask what percentage of our families pay their fees and what percentage of our families do not? Do we have an analysis of like who is, who isn't?
I don't have that right.
Well, and I can't answer that question regardless, but just to clarify, are you asking specific to food or?
No, I'm asking specific in general. I'm like, a kid loses a library book, 90% of the time, a parent says, I want you to be able to check out another book next week when you go to the library. Here's $14 for that book. How many of our families kind of year after year or incident after incident are unable to pay? I think that in part, because I think if we go, oh, we don't want to charge any fees and 90% of people are able to, I think if we say we don't want to go to collections and it's 5% of people who are unable to, I think that those details matter. I also think it's relevant, like what we're generating in donations, and I think it's relevant how much it costs us to keep trying to collect. So one of the arguments I've seen for not charging for lunch is that districts were actually spending more trying to collect lunch than they were generating by having people pay for it. And so I think the different factors that indicate how we need to move forward are relevant to what extent what measures we take to collect fees.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Very nice hands. Okay, this is kind of building off of what Ali was saying, but it's slightly different. But I'm just gonna go back to a personal experience and then make sure I'm understanding some of the suggested language. I distinctly remember being a parent, this is not just food balances, who had fees and fines. Okay, my kid lost the book somewhere in the house. The book never got returned. Something with the recorder, whatever it was, okay? Or there were sometimes, as my kids were in high school, the athletic, the types, because my kids wanted to do everything. There were athletic and extracurricular fees that quite honestly, I was like, I can't pay all of this. So, but what I experienced was I never got a letter that said, we're taking you to small claims court. I did get many reminders that there was a balance. And given where I was at the time, I may not have still paid it. I might have been like duly noted. And you know when it showed up? When I came back to enroll next year. When I enrolled my kids the next year, somehow they remembered that we had not returned that book. You know what I mean? Or we still owed a balance on the activity fee, and it kind of got rolled in to next year's enrollment costs for like, here's your start of the year costs. So I guess what I'm wondering is, I do understand that, you know, we have a variety of fees, rentals, and fines that parents may not pay or have the ability to pay when they incur them, right? I don't remember, I mean, I guess I'd be curious, are we including the small claims court or the collection just as a way to say, like, in the worst case scenario, we need something to hopefully get the money back, but how often would we even resort to that? You know what I mean? Like, so I'm trying to figure out.
Yes, same.
Because if we're doing like 20 different things to try to get payments from parents, I don't know that we would ever exercise this, but maybe having something in the policy, at least in a worst case scenario, gives us something. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it's the right direction to go. I'm just trying to understand how often we would actually implement the very thing that's in the policy. If you remove it totally, then you're kind of like, okay, you guys have had this recurring balance, this recurring balance, this recurring balance. You're either, you can't pay it or you're choosing not to, or whatever the range of options are. And then if your kid moves on to the next school or graduates, that balance may just stay in the district, right? So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, are we including something like the small claims court or collections as like a way to say, like, in the worst case scenario, we would have something, we'd have some way to leverage payment on the fee, but you know, yeah, let me just ask it that way. Is it like a worst case scenario? It's not a common practice, is it?
Yeah, so let me answer the question. So the Neola policy, right, had the small claims court option. I've not been around the district long, but I don't know if we were taking it baseball. We do have a contract with a third-party vendor to collect bad debt, people that haven't paid or wrote out checks that were not sufficient funds. We do have a contract and I think the details of this would be worked out, the triggers when we go, how much would be worked out in procedures, not the board policy. So I left a small claims court in there saying, I don't know if we've ever taken a small claims court, that's never come up in my asking current staff on budget plan county, but we do use a third party. The small claims court is a Neola language, right, which is the normal business routine. If someone doesn't pay their bill, you take them to small claims court.
And so I would love to respond if I may to, and harken back to something Marcus said, which is that yes, indeed, it is not prescriptive language. It is a disclosure of an option that the district reserves the right to. And how often or when or ever is a procedural matter. I wrote it into the food service policy as a right to reserve to pursue not court, but formal debt collection efforts. And the reason that I did was because I think it's important to be, some of the other language can be a little bit, we will make collection efforts. Well, we are doing that. We're in year 2 of doing that nearly incessantly, and we still see a historically high level of debt accumulating and must be reconciled somehow. And I want to be able to use all of that money in Fund 50 to do things like many of you I know are familiar with the waste drug pilot. Well, that cost about $50,000 to launch. I look at debt of $250,000. One of the things that I see is that's maybe 4 or 5 schools that could get retrofit with that same capacity. Try to expand that service to more schools. And I want to be able to manage the debt in the most responsible and equitable way we can. And right now we're facing what seems like unprecedented pressure, at least in the fund that funds my operations. That's why I have one.
Okay.
But I feel if we're going to charge fees, if we know there are certain families that are not family eligible. Because that's the first thing we recommend people do, fill out the application. If there's hardship, we can waive the fees, right? If you can't afford it, we can waive it. So these are families that I would say are not in that category that don't pay. If we have no options to collect that money, either through small claims court or third party debt collector, then why are we charging fees? Because pretty soon it's gonna be out there, you don't have to pay these fees. And then we've got a revenue problem, right? So that's why it's, if you wanna go that route, I think that's fine. Some districts have no fees, but it costs money. And property tax.
Yeah. Well, I know that my hand wasn't up, but can I just add just a little bit of context? So I would say, just from personal experience, the example that I just gave. We had been a family that at one point qualified for free and reduced lunch. As I made more money, I graduated from free lunch to reduced lunch. Then I made a little bit more money and now I no longer qualify, but I still have 4 children. I don't qualify for the waiver, but I'm still incurring, all of the expenses of having 4 children in school. So I'm only saying that to say that sometimes you have families who are still working really hard, have multiple children, may not qualify for a waiver, and yet their kids still need to eat. They still want to play an instrument. They still want to play a sport. You know what I mean? All of those things. So for me, like I said, in the example that I was giving before, when I was not able to pay some of those balances, they came back when I re-registered the children at the beginning of the next year. Like it just kind of followed me. But I don't remember getting a third party collection call. No, maybe that's because somebody was like, we're gonna keep working with her. Do you know what I mean? And the small claims court seems a little excessive.
Well, I think what you just described, Michelle, is a collection mechanism.
Right.
Which is at enrollment, you must make the district whole.
But it doesn't stop you from the problem.
Right.
So I'm not sure about the efficacy of it, but
Right, but this language doesn't say a collection mechanism, right? Or is that still in there?
That's just my phrase for what you described.
I was looking at yours, because there is something in the,
Yep.
what you referred to, Josh, in the food services policy
There is.
around under bad debt.
Yep.
The district reserves the right to pursue formal debt collection efforts in order to maintain fiscal integrity and sustainability in the interests of the general public.
Yep.
That's just a different way. I mean, what you're saying in that statement is sort of inclusive of what is also here in the student fines and fees.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's my language, and
Yeah, I mean-
wanted to express it as such to explain. This is a common fund that when
Yeah.
used to improve the program, improves it for everybody, and
Okay.
when we suffer debt depletion of the fund, that also depletes everybody's capacity.
So the.
Okay, we got two board member questions, sorry, board member Simpkin, then board member Moser Feltham.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna make a comment. So as a parent also, I have had moments in this district where I thought I didn't have enough money to afford to send my child to these schools. And I didn't qualify for free and reduced anything. And so I think that it is like, I don't think we're recognizing the reality of our families. I think if they're not paying their bills, there's a reason why they're not paying their bills. And so I still remain incredibly uncomfortable with the idea that a family can get in trouble for not paying the bills, either by going to collections and having it affect their credit or by going to court. I really want that out. What we do with fees, I think is like the next conversation perhaps. I don't know if we're prepared to do that today. But we charge too much and we give our students things that our families can't afford to replace all the time. And that's an issue. That's really an issue. We charge so much for sports that it becomes a strain on families in order for the child to be able to participate. So, you know, I think that this is a huge equity question right here. And it's an important one. But I think it starts with people not being punished for attending school.
Thanks. Board member Feltham.
My question is about a timeline. Do we have to keep talking about this tonight? Can we talk about it again different nights?
You get another.
You get another,
Another two, remember
Yep,
you get.
great.
it's always a couple times.
Great. It's almost 9. We have a closed session next. I am struggling to pay attention. And if I can't pay attention, I can't fulfill my duties as a board member. So that's where I'm at. We have another policy to talk about too, right?
Could I just punctuate one thing? The language in to meet a DPI requirement for the 30th of April, the board will need to pass a policy about unpaid meal debt. That policy does not need to contain this thing.
Well, I was gonna say, but let's wait to get to that policy because I think that's the issue we're having right now. We're crossover in different policies and we just need to focus on 3710. That is the policy that we're talking about right now. We're not talking about the debt. We're not talking about anything else. I want us to just focus on one policy.
So a path forward, I think if we allow a lot of the issues being raised, I think can be addressed with the next policy.
Yes.
A second issue of for the third, we're gonna talk about the waiver of school fees or fines. Our current, so that's up on top, 6152.01 waiver of school fees or fines, which would be replacing our current fee waiver policy 3340, which actually, like, is better. It's got a little more specificity, it's a better process. It gets at what I think our current policy allows us to do, and that is take in, I believe our current policy, if you read it, says you can do more than just free and reduced price lunch application, but it's not really specified. So Neola's policy, if we just spend a little bit of time on that, because I think it addresses a lot of things, right? I think it gives a clearer path for families and, principals to make a determination on waiving fees. I've struck fines being able to be waived. Fines are for like using a library in an instrument. I took it out, but you can see that I've stricken those. But this policy says, one can apply for a waiver. And it talks about the following folks that can do it.
Yeah.
And so you can see A, it's free and reduced price lunch, homelessness, and then students, C, on the first page, students who are eligible to receive reduced price lunch or breakfast, students whose families have suffered very significant losses of income due to severe illness or injury, unusual expenses, but not limited to fire, flood, storm damage. Catch-all, other good and just reasons as determined by the school principal. Michelle, you're kind of got 4 kids, I can get you some, or I can get you all, waive some or all. And be directed to inform folks about this, and then it talks about the first bill and notice fees that are sent. And then it talks about the procedures for doing it or resolution of disputes. So basically you work with your school principal. Put it in writing. That's a timeline for review of the waiver. And then you can appeal the school principal decision to the district administrator within a certain number of days. So I think this gives that option of being able to waive them. If you want to continue to maintain. And again, right now our current policy is fees, rentals, so on and so forth, must be included in June preliminary budget. So that's what we're looking for. If you want to, our current policy requires us to have those fees for 24-25 in the preliminary budget you approve in June. That's our plan. That's all it's time.
Thank you. Yeah, this is due to come back to us next month. Yeah, the second review. I think surfacing is the board having philosophical approach or on our approach to these things like that. So thank you.
Yep. All right, USDA. Oh,
So I know some of us are hitting a wall, and I recognize that you're going to have a second pass at this. But in order for there to be a difference between what you see now and what I can prepare for the second pass, it would help me if at least I could, since Bob just elevated this current policy looked at, if there was language regarding the waiver, that made it more broad, so it's not specific to students who receive free and reduced lunch. Is there more of an appetite to adopt some of the language, the other considerations, the exceptions, that's what I'm referring to, B through E, if that's embedded in the original policy that we reviewed, or still across the board? No.
Not for, I don't think a family should have to ask. And should have to submit their situation for approval.
Okay.
I think I'd appreciate additional information specific to how many of our families ask for waivers and receive waivers. I do think I'm interested in how to engage in that process thoughtfully. If that's what we end up continuing doing. I think free or reduced lunch as a marker is complicated because of the threshold for free or reduced lunch.
And that was what board member Simpkins raised when you stepped out, and actually board member Nichols also raised that, just that's not a threshold. These families said may have a fallback. I just wanted to add that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for helping me connect that.
I think definitely a red line on food debt collection in that. And you know, I understand the pragmatic situation of having to get it done for next year, but I think long term, whether it be this budget cycle or the next budget cycle, finding a way to get to universality is at least a goal of mine, and how we make that fiscally sustainable in the district. But I think the more information, and I think at least for you in drafting, I think a red line around food and debt collection. And I think, you know, just making like that the absolute last thing. So whether it's like 300% of the poverty line or something like that, but that's off the top of my head.
Is this the right juncture to talk about this last policy a bit?
Yeah.
University are also a goal of mine. I have those discussions. Right now, I want to explain why this policy is in front of you tonight. We, as I think you may know, we had a DPI review once every 5 years. Cycle, comes to review our operations. And one of the things that they discovered was that we do in fact have a protocol for how we handle the reaching of zero balance on school meal fund and what to do. We have a protocol on our website, but we do not have a board ratified policy governing this. So DPI has said you actually do need to have one. What you have before you is a draft so that the board can in fact review and ratify a policy. As I mentioned at the top of the conversation, there are three main themes in this policy. One is how we agree to handle special dietary accommodations as dictated by a medical prescription. In no wise is the policy in front of you a departure from our current plans. I will say that as a blanket statement. We have here the Neola format following suit. Typically gives you options. You select the options you want, strike through, as you can see in pink highlight, and strike through the options you do not want. So adopting this policy would mean we will continue to adhere in every case to our legal obligation to provide special dietary accommodations as prescribed by the professional. It says that we will continue to serve USDA meals to students regardless of their negative balance. And it says we will in fact use the farm school program. We will continue to do so. Those are all continuations of what we do now. There are some specifics in here. I will call your attention only as much as I think it's useful. A couple of specifics which are discretionary, talk through with health services. How often do we collect and update special dietary orders? How long does the family have to provide medical documentation after they've indicated the need? So we reserve the right to, we will honor for 180 days an operating school year, a special dietary request. We may make efforts to update at that time annually to make sure we have current information. Families will have 20 days after they indicate a special dietary need to acquire prescriptive orders, knowing that it can be difficult to schedule appointments. We want to have some grace, some leeway there. We have a threshold of, we are required to establish a threshold, a defined threshold of acceptable negative meal balance. That's set currently in this policy at $15 to accommodate the fact that you might get a notice. You may be a family who operates very much, I am going to update, I am going to constantly be making the district whole what I owe, but I received a notification on Friday. It took me a few days to get there. My student ate for a few days or even a week before I found the time to get online and make that payment. We want to have some accommodations for that. The language that is in green, which we've discussed quite a bit here tonight, is additional language not supplied by Neola. But that is the policy you have in front of you. And if it is to be amended, that is perfectly within our process. We simply need to have the board ratify a policy governing how we handle school meal debt, unpaid school meal debt. We do not currently have one.
And that's a requirement.
It is.
Right. Okay.
It is.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Board member questions? Well, that seemed more compliance based. It was very helpful to know it was not a departure of current policy, so, or current practice, so. Thank you. And that's the last final one. All right, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Oh, second, Nichols, all those in favor? Adjourned.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
This is forever.